Chapter 136. When he walked out of the house, Lu Chen's expression did not change. There was no anger, and no frustration. It was as if what Jean Dan Fryer had said to him did not affect him at all. He just looked up at the sky. The sun was high in the sky, and the sky was blue with white clouds. It was a sunny day. He looked at it for a while, and then walked towards the herb garden. Along the way, there were people coming and going, some of whom were acquaintances. Some greeted him, and some nodded at him. But Lu Chen seemed to have something on his mind. He was silent all the way, as if he did not see anything. He walked all the way to the entrance of the herb garden. The mountain breeze blew, and the unique herbal fragrance of the herb garden wafted over. Lu Chen looked at the neat spiritual fields in front of him. He looked at them expressionlessly, and then walked forward. But the direction he walked was not towards his spiritual field. Right at this moment, a pleasantly surprised voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "Big brother Lu, why do you look so pale?" Lu Chen stopped and turned around. He saw Exin running over from behind. She looked at him worriedly and whispered, "Brother Lu, are you okay?" Lu Chen looked down. After a while he shook his head and said, "I'm fine." Exin still looked worried. "Brother Lu, do you want to go back and rest? I can help you apply for leave." Lu Chen was silent, and then said, "You better not go to Uncle Lin Sheng's place. He won't listen to you." Exin was a little surprised. "Forget it, I'll go with you first. It's not good to talk on the road." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the people around him. Finally he looked at a place in the distance, and then nodded. "Okay. What?" Beside Lu Chen's spirit field, the two of them sat side by side on the ridge of the field. Exin looked a little annoyed and said indignantly, "How can Uncle Master Lin be like this? He clearly knows that something went wrong with your cultivation and hurt your body, but he still punishes you like this. Isn't this bullying?" Compared to when he first came to the herb garden, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be a lot better. When he saw Exin's annoyed look, he even smiled and comforted Exin. "Forget it, it was my fault." Exin bit her lip. "That won't do. Brother Lu, you are just a servant disciple. You don't have much income in Kunlun Mountain. Don't you count on the spirit herbs as rewards? Why did Marshal Uncle Lin just casually say it, and you? Because he is Jean Dan Fryer." Lu Chen smiled. Exin choked. For a moment, she was speechless. She didn't know what to say. After a while she said gloomily, In any case, I just don't feel right." After a moment of silence, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said to Lu Chen, "Big brother Lu, why don't I secretly ask Marshal Aunt Yen and have her speak on your behalf? Uncle Yen is very good to me. If I ask her, she will definitely agree." Lu Chen stared at her, a glimmer of light flashing in his eyes. Then he smiled and gently said, "No need. Your Marshal Uncle Yen is a well-known veteran gold core realm cultivator. That favor isn't light, so why waste it on such a trivial matter?" "But you. Didn't I say it's okay?" Lu Chen smiled and patted the girl's head. "Why can't you remember what I said? I told you not to hit my head." Exin rubbed her forehead. However, after hearing Lu Chen's words, she relaxed a bit. She took out a small bag from her pocket and handed it to Lu Chen. "For you, brother Lu." Lu Chen took it and looked at it. "What is this?" "My family's tea." Exin smiled. "Didn't I mention it to you last time? Although this isn't our family's most famous tea, Little Crane, it's still a top-grade tea. It's not worse than most of the tea in Kunwa City's shops." Lu Chen nodded. The hand holding the bag of tea slightly tightened. When he looked up, he saw the sunlight shining down on them. The girl sitting on the ridge of the field was smiling sweetly. She was as beautiful as a flower, and as warm as the sun. Even though there was a faint red scar on her beautiful face that couldn't be erased, all the darkness and sadness seemed to quietly dissipate at this moment in her warm smile. "Brother Lu, are you really okay? You look a bit absent-minded. Do you feel uncomfortable?" Exin asked. Lu Chen smiled. "I'm fine. Exin said. "By the way, I haven't seen Atsu for a few days. How is it?" Lu Chen looked at her and said, "It's fine. It's the same as usual. I can't even see its shadow when it runs around all day. Exan pursed her lips and complained. That's right. I went to look for it several times during the day, but I didn't see it even once. Brother Lu, it keeps wandering around in the forest all day. I'm always worried that something might happen to it. Lu Chen was silent for a while and said, What you said makes sense. Ah. Exan suddenly became excited and said, Yes. You didn't listen to me before. Today you actually listened to me. Lu Chen smiled and said, Don't worry. I've been quite busy recently. After this period, I'll keep it under control and won't let it run around. You can also come and see it often. Exan giggled and said, Okay. Time was unknown in the mountains. Day and night could not be heard in the tree hole. In the ancient mottled tree hole, there seemed to be a kind of gentle light that always shone here. The water in the puddle on the ground seemed to be slightly murkier than before, but it was still clear enough to see the bottom of the water. On the ground around the puddle, the strange bloodlines had long disappeared. Now there were only a few traces of blood left on the ground. There was no one in the tree hole, but there was a dog. Black Dog Atu's entire body was wrapped tightly in white cloth. It looked just like a white dog. It lay on the ground beside the puddle and slept for a long time. Then it opened its eyes. The only eye it had left. The gentle light shone into Atsu's eyes. At first it was a little surprised, but soon, it seemed to remember this familiar place and quickly calmed down. It turned its head and looked around. It found that Lu Chen was not here. This discovery made it a little worried, but soon, it realized that it was the only dog here, so it calmed down again. During this time, its eyes occasionally swept across the water, and it suddenly froze. There was a strange thing reflected in the water. A monster that was tightly wrapped in white cloth, and only its mouth, nose, and one eye were exposed. Atsu shrank back subconsciously. Then, as if it had noticed something, it shook its head at the monster in the water. The monster in the water also tilted its head. Atsu suddenly seemed to be a little happier, as if it had found something fun. It began to shake its head at the water, and after a while, it stopped. It felt a little thirsty. It moved its body, approached the puddle, and stretched its head to drink the water. The water rippled, and the sweet water slid down its throat. Atsu felt a lot better. But at this moment, it suddenly saw a shadow in the water. In its eyes, a black flame slowly lit up, burning quietly. Bang! A sound came, and Lu Chen appeared in this tree hole. He patted his clothes, stood up, and walked behind Atsu. He looked at it and said with a little surprise, Hey, you're awake? Atsu, who was lying by the water, slowly turned its head and looked at Lu Chen with its only eye. In the deepest part of its pupils, in an unknown place, a little black flame was burning faintly. That night, when it was dark in the mountains of Kunlun, the moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Soon no one stayed outside. Lu Chen carried Atsu and walked quietly in the darkness of the night. It was as if he had merged with the surrounding shadows, and no one could detect him. After walking for a long time, Lu Chen stopped under a big tree. He first looked around, and then with one hand holding Atsu, who could not move, he easily climbed to the top of the tree trunk and hid in the dark. In his arms, Atsu looked around curiously, as if it didn't know why Lu Chen brought it here. Lu Chen didn't take any further action. He just sat on a branch with Atsu in his arms, and then whispered in its ear, Don't bark. Wait here for a while. Atsu was a little confused. It looked at Lu Chen, but it still listened to Lu Chen's words and quietly nestled in his chest. On this chilly night, the man and the dog sat in the dense thicket and waited quietly. The night was getting darker, and the mountain wind was getting colder. The night in Kunlun seemed to be emotionless. It looked at the world coldly, and it looked at the vicissitudes of life. Lu Chen closed his eyes and waited in silence. From his angle, he could see the house in the distance through the gap between the branches and leaves. He didn't know when it was, but it was probably late at night. Finally, a figure came back from the distance. He walked quickly in the night, and soon returned to the house. Halfway through he suddenly stopped as if he felt something. But when he turned his head and looked around he didn't find anything. He frowned, and finally walked back to his house. In the deep shade of the trees, in the darkness, Lu Chen lowered his head and whispered in Atsu's ear, Don't bark. Atsu looked at him and then nodded. Only then did Luchin slowly let go of his palm that was covering Atsu's ear. He stared at Atsu, and then he saw Atsu's throat emit a harsh and fierce growl. Under the creepy scar, it opened its mouth, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. I know. Luchin looked at it and said faintly. Chapter 137. A green leaf rolled a few times from the old eaves tiles, then floated in the wind, swept across the alley, and slowly fell in the distance. In the deserted little shop, there was a pot of hot tea and 2 cups. Hot steam rose from the clear tea and floated in the air, exuding a unique fragrance. How does it taste? This is a rare top-grade tea. Luchin asked Old Ma. Old Ma smacked his lips a few times, then said seriously, I can't taste it. It feels similar to my crude tea. Brute. Luchin glanced at him disdainfully and shook his head. He picked up the teacup in his hand and took another sip, saying, Smell the aroma and taste the mellow aftertaste in your mouth. It's at least 10 times better than those lousy teas of yours. Old Ma grinned and said, I still feel that my black tea is strong enough, comfortable to drink. This tea is too bland, there's no taste at all. Luchin waved his hand at him. It seemed that he had already given up on this fat man's taste. Old Ma laughed, kicked a package from the side, and put it on the table, then said to Luchin, These are the things you want, they're all bought. I say, why do you want these messy things for no reason? Those bones can barely be regarded as spiritual materials, but what do you want the cinnabar charm brush for? Do you want to draw talismans? He stared at Luchin and said, I don't remember you learning this skill. Luchin laughed in ridicule as he casually took the bag and placed it by his side, and then he said bluntly with disdain, Let's not talk about whether I know talismans or not. Just based on my natural talent, I know everything I learn. How much do you know about me? Stop bragging. Why do I feel that it's you who is bragging? The alley outside the house was deep and quiet, and the fragrance of tea lingered in the house. 2 people sat facing each other. Last time you asked me to investigate the matter of those 2 women, there was some news recently. Old Ma lowered his voice and said to Luchin. Luchin's hand that was pouring tea paused for a moment before he said, Go ahead. There's nothing unusual about Su Qingjun, but that little girl from the Bai family seems a little strange. Luchin frowned slightly and didn't say anything. Speaking of which, these 2 people are really difficult to investigate. Right now, they are treasures in the eyes of the various families, and it is too late to guard them to the death. Fortunately, the 2 of them are very famous, so some stories and rumors still spread in private. Old Ma didn't immediately point out what was strange but sighed first. Rumor? Luchin glanced at him and said, Can that thing be trusted? Old Ma shrugged and said, There's no other way. These 2 girls are now closely watched by the 2 aristocratic families and the Kunlun party. If the investigation is a little too big, it will alert the enemy, so we can only take it slow. Do you want to hear these rumors? If not, then wait for a while and see what else I can find out. Luchin took a sip of tea and said, Since we have nothing to do, let's hear it. Su Qingjun has been the legitimate daughter of the eldest branch since she was young, and her talent was confirmed early on, so she has always been doted on by the Su family, and is seen as a pearl in the palm. Every step she took was the best. She hired the best teachers to study and learn how to read. She cultivated the best and most suitable cultivation methods and divine arts. She was intelligent, knowledgeable, and well-mannered. On top of that, she was born with a beauty that would cause flowers to blush and the moon to block the moon. In any case, I have never seen such a perfect woman. Old Ma sighed and said with emotion, I don't know which man in the future will have the good fortune to become a cultivation companion with such a woman. Luchin said, I don't know about others, but I don't think you have any hope. Old Ma said angrily, You talk too much. You make it sound like you have hope. Luchin laughed heartily, raised the teacup, and drained it in one gulp. Old Ma ignored him and continued, Compared to Su Qingjun, that girl White Lotus is a little strange. It is said that she is not the daughter of the main branch of the Bai family, but the child of a distant branch. 2 years ago no one had even heard of her. It is as if a peerless genius suddenly appeared in the Bai family overnight. Lu Chen slowly put down the wine cup and looked at Old Ma. Old Ma was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Lu Chen nodded and said, "It sounds like there is indeed something strange." Old Ma said, "I have carefully inquired about it, but all the information is from the past 2 years. When that girl was 8 or 9 years old or even earlier, everything is blank. No one has mentioned her, and it seems that no one knows." Lu Chen's fingers gently rubbed on the table. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "But if there is a problem with White Lotus's background, the Kunlun party will definitely not allow her to be accepted by Hakushin Jinkuen." Old Ma nodded and said, "Of course. What kind of status does Hakushin Jinkuen have? His successor will definitely be thoroughly investigated by the Kunlun party." Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "During my days on Kunlun Mountain, I have heard rumors about Hakushin Jinkuen and the Bai family in private several times. Are they related?" Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, "I know that. There is indeed no relationship. Bai Chen is the Taoist name bestowed by Patriarch Tianhong in the past. The word Bai should be a coincidence." Lu Chen tersely acknowledged his words and said, "Then continue investigating. Let's slow down on Su Qingjun for now. We have to investigate White Lotus in detail, especially her experiences before she came to the Bai family. It's best if we can dig it out." Old Ma glanced at him and said, "Did you discover something? Why are you so fixated on this 10-year-old girl? If there's anything wrong, you have to tell me." Lu Chen smiled and said with a calm expression, "I just have a nagging feeling that she's a little strange." Old Ma shrugged and said, "All right, I'll investigate slowly. Be careful on the mountain." The next day, sunlight shone down from the clear sky and shone on the flowing fragrance garden. In a hall outside the herb garden, Exian and Melaleuca japonica were together. As usual, Exian made tea for Melaleuca japonica and chatted with her to relieve her boredom. The fragrance of the tea wafted in the air. Melaleuca japonica picked up the teacup Exian handed her and took a sip. Then her eyes narrowed slightly and she praised, "Good tea." Exian giggled on the side. She flipped her palm and poured herself a cup of tea. Melaleuca japonica lightly tapped the tea table and sighed. With a smile, she said, "Cultivating while drinking tea. The heart is as calm as water. I heard about this realm from my Shurzuan when I was young. It's only now that I vaguely have this feeling." Exian smiled and said, "How is that possible? Shirshu, your cultivation is so high. You must have long surpassed the realm mentioned by Shurzuan." Melaleuca japonica glared at her and scolded, "Little girl, you're blindly flattering me. My Shurzuan's cultivation is as high as the heavens. She is the top Yuanying Jinren. How can I compare to her?" Exian stuck out her tongue. Melaleuca japonica drank the tea in her hand and placed the cup on the tea tray. Exian came over and added another cup for her. At the same time she said, "Shirshu, it's been a while. Why hasn't there been any movement from my Shurzuan's side?" Melaleuca japonica was silent for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of worry in her eyes. She said, "Yes. Logically, she shouldn't have taken so long. Could it be that she has encountered a huge problem when she is breaking through the life and death barrier?" Exian was shocked. She said, "What? Then is my Shurzuan in danger?" Melaleuca japonica said, "The life and death barrier. If you pass it, you will survive. If you retreat, there will be great difficulties. Isn't that what it means? There will always be risks." Sigh. Exian was a little absent-minded. After a while, she sighed softly. Melaleuca japonica looked at her and couldn't help but caress her face. She said gently, "It's okay. Although that old thing isn't very serious usually, her mouth is cheap and her life is tough. I think she won't die." Exian forced a smile and said, "I know. I hope Shurzuan is blessed by heaven." Melaleuca japonica wanted to say something more. Suddenly, footsteps were heard outside the house. After a while, a clear and melodious voice came in. "Is Shirshu Melaleuca japonica in? Disciple Su Qingjun is here to pay a visit." Melaleuca japonica and Exian were stunned. Then they sat down and said, "I'm here. Come in." A faint red light flashed. "Su Qingjun, who was wearing a beautiful scarlet feather shawl, walked in. She first bowed to Melaleuca japonica and smiled. "Greetings, Shirshu Melaleuca japonica." Melaleuca japonica smiled. "You are now Jean Dan Friar. No need to be so polite. Come and sit with us." Su Qingjun smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Uncle Master." She walked over as she spoke. Xian stood up and smiled at Su Qingjun. "Sister Su, you are here." Su Qingjun nodded and smiled. "Yes. I haven't seen sister for a few days. You seem to have become more beautiful." Xian smiled. She poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of Su Qingjun. "Sister, have some tea." Su Qingjun thanked her. After taking a sip, she said to Melaleuca japonica, "Shirshu, I came here this time to thank you." Melaleuca japonica waved her hand. "It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning." Su Qingjun, however, said earnestly, "The red amber pill isn't easy to refine. Not to mention the amount of spirit materials used. You've spent a lot of effort to refine a spirit pill for me and help me break through to the golden core realm. I'll never forget your kindness. Even my father specifically told me to show my gratitude to Martial Uncle respectfully." She took out a jade box from her side and presented it to Melaleuca japonica with both hands. "This is a small token of my appreciation. I can't repay Shirshu's kindness. I hope Shirshu will accept it." Melaleuca japonica smiled. She looked at Su Qingjun for a moment. Then, she took the jade box and sighed. "Your father is really lucky to have such an outstanding daughter like you. I really pity you." Su Qingjun lowered her head slightly. She blushed, looking as beautiful as a fairy. She was like a lily swaying in the wind. "Shirshu is too kind." Yin Luo sized her up and said with a smile, "Your aura is calm and steady. Does this mean that your cultivation base has almost stabilized?" Su Qingjun said, "Almost. But recently, I still feel a little flustered and short of breath when I cultivate. My master has already told me to eat some eagle fruit. It should be able to get rid of it in about a month." Melaleuca japonica nodded. "Yes. The eagle fruit is very beneficial to your dark moon arts. Your master is right." Su Qingjun smiled. She stood up and said, "That's why I came here this time to ask for your help." Chapter 138. Melaleuca japonica was a bit surprised and said, "Eagle fruit is precious, but it can still be found. You can find it in the Baichao Tang Medicine Hall on the mountain, and in the many spiritual material shops in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain. You don't need my help." Su Qingjun smiled and seemed a bit embarrassed. She said, "Martial Uncle, my master means that I like freshly picked eagle fruit the best." Melaleuca japonica was startled for a moment. She looked pensive and suddenly lowered her head to open the lid of the jade box in her hand. She took a look inside and her expression changed slightly. Then she became silent. After a moment, she sighed and said, "It seems that senior martial brother Muyuan really has great expectations for you." Su Qingjun slightly bowed her head with a smile on her face. She didn't explain further and just said softly, "I sincerely ask Martial Uncle to fulfill my wish. Qingjun can't thank you enough." Melaleuca japonica closed the jade box in her hand. After thinking for a moment, she nodded and said, "All right, I'll arrange this. You can go now. There will probably be news in a few days. I'll let you know when the time comes." Su Qingjun bowed deeply to her and said with a respectful expression, "Thank you, Martial Uncle." Melaleuca japonica sighed and got up to avoid her. Then she went forward to hold Su Qingjun's hand and walked out with her. She said, "Qingjun, your future is promising and your achievements are limitless. You really don't need to be so polite to an old woman like me. I can't accept it." Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "Martial Uncle, what are you talking about?" Melaleuca japonica smiled and waved her hand to stop her. She said, "It's okay. We both know what to do. Anyway, I'll remember this. Just wait for my news." Su Qingjun nodded and thanked Melaleuca japonica again. Then, she smiled and said goodbye to Xian, who came out behind Melaleuca japonica before leaving. Watching the beautiful woman's figure disappear at the end of the corridor, Xian couldn't help but show a trace of envy. She said to Melaleuca japonica, "Martial Uncle, Sister Sue is really amazing. Whether it is cultivation, talent, appearance, or bearing, she's perfect. Melaleuca japonica smiled and didn't say anything. Then, she turned and walked back to the room. Exion followed up and asked curiously, "Oh right, Martial Uncle, why did you have such a big reaction when Sister Sue said she wanted fresh eagle fruit?" Melaleuca japonica snorted and said, "What do you know? There's a lot of knowledge in that sentence." Exion was instantly interested. She pulled Melaleuca japonica's arm and said with a smile, "Martial Uncle, tell me about it." Melaleuca japonica rolled her eyes and said, "Make tea." Okay. Exion smiled and quickly poured the cold tea. Then she made a new cup of hot tea and placed it in front of Melaleuca japonica. Then she said with a smile, "Martial Uncle, teach me. Let me broaden my horizons." Melaleuca japonica took a sip of tea and sighed. The eagle fruit has many uses. Although it's precious, it's not a particularly rare spiritual ingredient. It's nothing much. However, there's something special about this kind of spiritual fruit. When it ripens, it naturally emits a pure spiritual energy. When the petals open, the energy will spread out for about 10 minutes. If you eat the eagle fruit during this time, the effect will increase by 10%. 10%. Exion said in surprise. "That's right. Only 10%. Melaleuca japonica said calmly. "Because no one can pick the eagle fruit at the right time to eat it, all the eagle fruits on the market are picked and preserved. Since there's not much difference in effect, no one cares about it." Exion looked outside the door and said, "Then why did Sister Sue, her Shifu, tell her to eat fresh fruits?" "That's what I was talking about." Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Her Shifu Masato Kihara really has high expectations of her. She spares no effort in even these minor details. In this way, if there are no accidents, her foundation in the future will be almost perfect. At least in the Yuanying realm, maybe she'll have a little more confidence." Exion was stunned for a moment. Then she shook her head and sighed. Different people have different fates. Sister Sue is really lucky. Lucky? Melaleuca japonica looked at her and smiled faintly but didn't say anything. The light and shadow distorted in midair. After a while, Lu Chen's figure appeared in the tree hole. Atsu, who was lying on the ground and feeling bored, suddenly raised its head. It barked and limped over. At this moment, some of the white cloth on Atsu's body had been removed, but more than half of its body was still tied up. It looked a little miserable. However, Atsu's tenacious and amazing vitality was once again displayed at this moment. After receiving treatment from Lu Chen, such serious injuries began to rapidly improve. Now it could even walk with some difficulty. Lu Chen squatted down, hugged Atsu's head, and patted it. Then he first checked its various wounds, nodded, and took out a bag of meat and threw it to it. Atsu immediately barked with joy, wagged its tail, and then lowered its head to eat. Lu Chen sat down and patted its head. Then he said, "You must be suffocated here. Bear with it a little longer. When your injuries are healed, you will be able to leave soon." Atsu raised its head and looked at him. It rubbed its head against his hand, and then lowered its head to continue eating the meat. However, after a few bites, it suddenly raised its head and stared at Lu Chen with its only eye. It let out a few low growls. Its sharp, snow-white fangs were revealed at the side of its mouth. Even its eyes seemed to be cold. It was just like those bloodthirsty and crazy black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos. The ancient bestiality hidden in the depths of blood seemed to be emitting from this black dog bit by bit. Lu Chen looked at it quietly. After a while he said faintly, "Don't worry. We will take revenge eventually." Atsu looked at him. After a while, it wagged its tail, and then lowered its head to eat the meat again. Lu Chen sat at the side and watched it eat nonstop. He watched as the white cloth gradually recovered its vitality and its shiny black fur, as well as the aura of a wild beast that was gradually revealed. Lu Chen remained silent. It was another day when the morning light shone down. The fresh air turned into a gentle breeze, blowing over the top of the flowing fragrance garden. Most of the handyman disciples came here on time to work, so did Lu Chen. But this day was a little different from usual. Jean Dan Fryer, who was in charge of this area, came here with another female practitioner, Melaleuca japonica, who had white hair and a ruddy complexion. They then picked 8 people according to the name list, and told them not to plant their own spirit herbs for the time being. Together, they came to the other side of the garden to a relatively independent and wider spiritual field. There were many trees planted in this spiritual field, all of the same kind. Some had already borne fruit, and the fruits were different from the others. They were green with red, oddly shaped, and somewhat resembled an eagle's beak. Lin Sheng did not immediately lecture them. Instead, he had been standing on the side with Melaleuca japonica, whispering to them. The other 8 handyman disciples stood silently beside the spiritual field, many of them looking puzzled. Lu Chun was among the 8. Coincidentally, He Changsheng was also there. When he turned around to look at the people around him, he saw He Changsheng. He Changsheng seemed to be looking at him as well. For some reason, He Changsheng looked much better than before. He no longer had that flustered and exasperated look on his face, nor did he have that violent temper. He looked much gentler. He even smiled at Lu Chun and nodded at him when Lu Chun looked at him. But if one looked closely, one would vaguely find that there was a trace of strange doubt hidden in the depths of He Changsheng's eyes. He also seemed to be secretly watching Lu Chun, as if he wanted to see something from Lu Chun. But in contrast, Lu Chun did not seem to have anything strange at all. He had been standing there quietly. Occasionally, he would meet He Changsheng's eyes, and he would nod calmly and politely. He was neither angry nor close, just the same as usual. He Changsheng looked at Lu Chun for a long time, and the doubt in his eyes deepened. After a while, Lin Sheng ended his conversation with Melaleuca japonica. It seemed that he had a clear idea of what was going on. He stood up and began to speak to the 8 handyman disciples that he had gathered. The content of his speech was not too complicated. It was nothing more than a rare 2-vein spiritual material, the eagle fruit, planted in this spiritual field. Because someone in the sect was in urgent need of this material, everyone was required to carefully cultivate it. If it was planted well, there would naturally be a reward, and the reward would be twice as much as usual. In addition to the usual harvest rewards, spiritual stones would be directly given to the person who planted the best. At this, the handyman disciples were all moved. In terms of rewards alone, this was unprecedented. And some people could also see that this time, the 8 people called over by Lin Sheng were almost the best in spiritual power cultivation among the handyman disciples in the herb garden. Obviously, this task assigned by the sect this time was for the one with the best results. With this tacit understanding and requirement, the 8 people quickly got into the mood and went down to the spiritual field. Lin Sheng nodded with satisfaction. He walked to the edge of the field and said to Melaleuca japonica, "Senior Sister Yen, what do you think?" Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Thank you for your help. It's a pity that this kind of thing could actually be done by the Foundation Establishment disciples. After all, the handyman disciples have low cultivation, and their control of the 5 elements of spiritual power is still lacking." Lin Sheng smiled and said, "Who said it wasn't? But as long as the official disciples have a bit of talent, they all see this kind of farming and mulberry planting as lowly and menial work. Even if they have nothing to do, they would definitely not come here to do this. Otherwise, if it was spread out, it would be a great humiliation. They would only feel that their status would be greatly lowered, and they would not do it even if they died. Sigh, I don't know how this trend started. What a pity." Melaleuca japonica was a little helpless and said, "That's true. Forget it. Anyway, now that it's like this, we can only pick the tall ones from the short ones. Let's choose the best one." Lin Sheng smiled and said, "That's the only way." Chapter 139. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world, even in the Kunlun party, which had many rules. In fact, the Kunlun party had existed for too long, and the various big and small forces in the sect were intertwined, making it even harder to keep a secret. Perhaps in the beginning, it could be kept a secret for a while, but as time went on, more and more people knew about this matter, and the rumors would naturally spread. The eagle fruit cultivated this time was prepared for the hottest young genius in the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. This news leaked out very quickly, and then among the odd job disciples who participated in this competition, Those who had a background, backing, or connections naturally knew about it, while those who didn't had a background remained in the dark. He Chongqing belonged to the kind of 3 no people who didn't have a background, backing, or connections, so he didn't know about this secret. However, he wasn't an idiot. From the scale of this competition and the cautiousness of the 2 Dan friar appearing at the same time, anyone would know that this matter was of great importance. He also saw that something was wrong from the expressions and movements of the other odd-job disciples, but no one would specifically come over to tell him anything. He Chongqing was very depressed and angry about this, but what he could do was to do his part as he had done in the past, and hope that through this competition, there would be a chance for a carp to jump over the dragon's gate. Lu Chen's situation was actually similar to He Chongqing's. At least, he was an ordinary person with no background and backing, but he had a way out. At dusk that day, Exin secretly ran to his residence and found him. She pulled him aside and whispered to him for a long time. In the end, she solemnly said to him, "Brother Lu, do you understand? You can't miss this opportunity." Lu Chen lay down on the bed, put his hands behind his head, and said with a smile, "You came running to me like this, aren't you afraid that others will find out and punish you?" Exin snorted and said unconcernedly, "I'm not the only one. Those people from aristocratic families all had their superiors leak information to them. Besides, I heard it from Martial Aunt Melaleuca Japonica. She didn't specifically tell me not to say it, so it's fine for me to tell you." Lu Chen patted the bed and said, "All right, I know what to do. Sai, it's so nice to have someone in the imperial court. It's so easy to get things done." Exin's eyes narrowed as she smiled, but she quickly widened them again. She said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, don't be careless. Once you're chosen, you can go to Sister Sue's side." Lu Chen was startled and said, "What do you mean?" Exin laughed and lowered her voice saying, "Even the people outside don't know about this. Martial Aunt Melaleuca Japonica only told me. It's good that you know, but don't let it slip." Lu Chen looked at her for a long time. He suddenly smiled and patted the edge of the bed saying, "Little girl, you're amazing. Come and sit, let's talk." "Nonsense, there's still a lot of things you don't know about me." Exin laughed proudly, then said in a low voice, "Actually, in this competition to plant the eagle fruit, it's just to pick out the person with the best ling cultivation, and then go to Sister Sue's side, because she wants to eat the fresh eagle fruit." She told Lu Chen about the eagle fruit in a low voice, and finally said, "In order to obtain the fresh and perfect eagle fruit, Martial Aunt Melaleuca Japonica spent a lot of effort to transplant 7 eagle fruit trees from the flowing fragrance garden, and directly plant them in the exclusive ling fields in Sister Sue's cave. What's next is to have people watch over them day and night, and carefully cultivate them. The date of bearing fruit is almost set. 1 tree will bear fruit every 3 days. When it bears fruit, people will be called immediately, and when it's ripe, it will be eaten without any delay. In this way, in 21 days, it will be a success. Sister Sue's serene moon arts will no longer be obstructed, and she can cultivate all the way to the peak of the Dan realm." Lu Chen fell silent after hearing this, and after a long while he nodded and said, "So that's how it is." Exin said curiously, "Brother Lu, why does your complexion look so bad?" Lu Chen shook his head, smiled bitterly and said, "It's nothing, it's just that after hearing you say this, I suddenly feel that on this path of cultivation, she and I are really worlds apart." Exin laughed out loud, and covered her mouth as she laughed, and said, "Look at what you're saying, there's definitely a world of difference between us. Not to mention that Sister Sue's family is rich, with countless wealth and goods. Even if it's natural talent, the difference is still too great. So Sister Sue is a genius, she was born with a good life and can't be forced. Look, I'm not jealous, I'm even happy for her." Lu Chen looked at her, and smiled after a while, and said, "You're right, natural talent can't be forced." Exin nodded and then warned him, "In short, Brother Lu, you just have to know. If you can be chosen this time, not only will Sister Sue owe you a favor, you might even have the chance to get closer to her. With this friendship, in the future in the Kunlun party, no one will dare to bully you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "All right, I understand." Exin stared at him. and seemed to be even more nervous than when she was competing herself. She clenched her fists and said, "You must win." Luchin patted his chest and said, "It has to be me, don't worry." Exian laughed, and seemed to have some trust in him, and seemed to be full of confidence. The cultivation of the eagle fruit was not easy. This kind of spiritual fruit grew on the eagle fruit tree, and its trunk was slender, and its root system was developed. To adjust the spiritual energy of the 5 elements in the soil of the spiritual field was much more strenuous than normal spiritual grass, and it basically took a whole day. The odd job disciples who were chosen to participate in this competition were all very hardworking, but due to their limited cultivation, after a whole day of cultivation, they all looked pale and exhausted by dusk. When the sun set, everyone left. Different from the grass garden, even if the odd job disciples left, this special spiritual field was still guarded by Melaleuca Japonica's people, in case of any accidents. When He Chongqing left, he was quite satisfied, especially when he saw that there were people guarding the spiritual field, and he felt a lot more relieved. The disciples of the rich and powerful families were really evil, colluding with each other to suppress ordinary disciples like him. They were really evil. Fortunately, the Kunlun party was a righteous sect, and there were good people like Melaleuca Japonica and Lin Sheng, who were fair and just, so he did not enter this sect in vain. If he really had the opportunity to cultivate in the future, he would definitely thank these 2 benefactors. With this thought in mind, he walked back to his house. Unknowingly, the sky had already darkened, and the sun was setting in the west. It was going to be dark soon. He Chongqing massaged his back, and felt a little sore. Since he was an odd job disciple, his talent was naturally not high, and his cultivation was also average. When he was working in the grass garden, he did not really work hard for a whole day like today, and it was really tiring. But for the dream of the future, it was worth it. He was thinking about the beautiful future, and like every ordinary young man, he dreamed that one day he would stand out from the rest of the world, and his cultivation would be the best in Kunlun. By then, all the Yuanying Jinren, including the sect leader, would kneel at his feet, and countless beautiful female disciples, with Su Qingjun as the leader, would look at him with deep affection, and softly ask to be his Taoist companion. These days were really too good. When he pushed open his door and walked in, there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, and he could not help but whistle. At this moment, a palm suddenly flew from behind the door, and heavily chopped the back of his neck, and even faintly heard a low muffled sound. He Chongqing's eyes rolled, and without even making a sound, he directly fell forward. Behind him, the door of the house slowly closed. The night was dark, and the mountain wind blew. The darkness was like a nightmare, always entangled him, and made He Chongqing feel very painful. But inexplicably, in that darkness he recalled the first half of his life. He once had a family. However, the biggest impression that his family had left on him was that the family had declined ever since he was young. From his grandfather's generation to his father's, it seemed that everyone was reminiscing about the glory of their ancestors, and then complaining and cursing at the reality in front of them, feeling indignant. But reality was reality. In the midst of complaining and cursing, the family still continued to decline uncontrollably. When he grew up, the He family was already destitute. He was very poor and dejected. Apart from the old house, he had nothing. However, he still remembered the obsession of his father and grandfather. He reminisced about the glory of the past that he had never seen. Gradually, he regarded restoring this glory as his duty. No one can stand in my way, and I will definitely restore the reputation of the family. I will succeed in my cultivation, become a spiritual master, and then rebuild the family business. Maria? No, what kind of identity is a spiritual master? Of course, I will marry a lot of wives, have a lot of children, and then buy countless wealth and goods. I will be better than the Su family, the Bai family, and the Lin family in Kunwa City. That beautiful scene seemed to be shining with golden light. He even laughed out loud in his dreams. Then he woke up. After waking up, he felt pain, as if his neck was being cut open. Then, when he turned his head with difficulty, he found that his hands and feet were tightly bound and thrown on the floor of the room, and there was an oil lamp on the table next to him, illuminating the room. There was another person in the room at the same time. "You're awake?" That person's back was facing him, but for some reason he seemed to be able to sense that He Changxing had woken up. But he didn't turn his head and just faintly spoke. That voice was low and slightly hoarse, and it sounded very unfamiliar. He Changxing felt that he had never heard it before, but after a while, he inexplicably felt that it was somewhat familiar. He opened his eyes with difficulty, and saw that the person's back was facing him. The person was holding a strange talisman brush in his hand, and he was drawing something on the white wall of his room. The traces drawn by the tip of the brush were as red as blood, and strange lines appeared on the white wall like the grin of a demon. Chapter 140. The strokes on the white wall were incomparably bright red, and looked very much like it was smeared with fresh blood. At the same time, because it was too full, droplets of blood beads flowed down in a somewhat messy manner, leaving behind a number of thin blood stains, making one's hair stand on end just by looking at it. That person silently and patiently drew, as if what he was doing was a very important matter, but as the seal brush in his hand continuously waved, his voice once again came over. Most of the people in this world are very gullible. Many times, whatever other people say, they will believe it. For example, this reincarnation formation. For many years, many people in the world thought that it was incomparably evil, often killing people to take their blood and smearing it into the formation. In fact, it is not so exaggerated. That person raised his arm, drew a stroke, then turned his head to take a look and said, "Those who really need human blood, that is the supreme supernatural power of the evil sect, and killing people to take their blood is very troublesome. How can it be as comfortable as using cinnabar, right?" Under the candlelight, that person's face was wearing a black mask, covering his entire face, leaving only two dark and deep eye sockets. He Changxing did not know why, suddenly felt a burst of fear, cried out, "You, who are you? What do you want to do?" That person laughed behind the mask. The laughter was hoarse. After a moment, he did not answer He Changxing's question, only indifferently pointed to his side and said, "If your voice is a little louder, I will use it to cut off your tongue." He Changxing's body trembled. With some difficulty turned his head to look. As expected, on the ground not far from his head, there was a black short sword stabbed into the ground. It looked extremely sharp, reflecting a chilling light in the candlelight. Other than that, he also saw that around his body on the ground, there were a number of small and crooked holes, the thickness of a finger. He did not know what exactly it was used for. A chill enveloped his entire body. He Changxing's face turned pale. For some reason, although this mysterious person did not look like a fiend, that kind of indifferent tone instead made people even more terrified. He Changxing saw that the masked person turned around again, continued to paint those strange formations on the wall. After a few deep breaths he stammered, "You, who are you? Where did I offend you?" That person did not respond. Quietly painted, blood-like marks spread out on the white wall. Indistinctly, like a bloody door was about to form. "Evil sect, evil sect." He Changxing's panting became more and more urgent. Suddenly he urgently said, "This big brother, I did not provoke your evil sect. Let me go, let me go." The talisman brush was filled with cinnabar. It tapped on a spot on the white wall heavily, like a finishing touch. It seemed that the lifeless bloodstains suddenly had some aura. Then, between the bloodstains, a bloody door seemed to be open, as if evil ghosts would rush out from behind the bloody door in the next moment. That person turned around, put down the brush and then walked to He Changxing's side, looked down at him, then quietly said, "You did not provoke the evil sect, but you are useful to me." He glanced at that mysterious and twisted, horrifying blood door on the white wall, quietly laughed and said, "I have searched for a long time and still could not find those companions, so I can only think of a way to let them come out themselves." He Changxing did not understand the meaning of this person's words, but instinctively felt an indescribable fear. His teeth started to chatter, chattering said, "You, what do you mean?" That person looked at him, squatted down beside him, but did not seem to have the intention to make a move. Instead looked at He Changxing's face. After a while, from behind the mask came a sigh. After a long while, he was heard saying in a low voice, "Bullying the weak, fiendish, greedy for life when encountering a strong enemy, afraid of death. Everyone is like that." Standing in the light modest and respectful, in the dark and scrupulous? Probably one day. No, should be a long time ago, I may also become like that. That masked person faintly muttered to himself. A pair of dark eyes looked at He Changxing, who was tightly bound and unable to move. His eyes did not seem to have the slightest emotion, other than a stretch of indifference. He Changxing suddenly felt that he was like a pig waiting to be slaughtered. That ice-cold sense of despair seemed to turn up from every corner of his body, making him tremble incessantly. He desperately twisted his body, but it was useless. It only made him look like a twisted worm, unexpectedly ugly. At the same time, he once again begged this person, shedding tears, begging him to let him go, and then he was willing to pay any price. That masked person took a ball of cloth and directly gagged his mouth. He Changxing's mouth made muffled sounds. His eyes revealed despair, and a trace of pain and regret. That masked person looked at him, suddenly smiled and said, "Are you regretting that you didn't shout for help just now?" He Changxing stared at this person, his eyes like they were about to spit fire, as if he could not wait to cut this person into 1,000 pieces. But that masked person shook his head, and then gently said, "I have already arranged a soundproof formation around this house. No matter how much you shout, no one will be able to hear. Saying like this, you will most likely be able to die in peace, right?" He Changxing's body suddenly stiffened. The despair in his eyes became more intense, and when he looked at this masked person again, the fear in his eyes also deepened. That masked person casually picked up the black dagger that was inserted into the ground, gently crossed it in front of him, and said, "Do you know, in the evil faction, there is an extremely terrible torture, used to punish people who have committed a great sin. That torture is called blood dripping. Tie the sinner to the ground, cover his eyes, and then cut open his blood vessels bit by bit. This way, the sinner will hear drip sounds, slowly flowing out from his body, dripping to the ground. Then there will be countless terrible blood-devouring insects, from the wounds on your body, into your flesh, bit by bit eating everything in your body, and you can even hear those chewing sounds. Isn't it very interesting?" The muscles on He Changxing's face violently trembled, his head desperately shook, his mouth as if he had gone crazy, strange sounds, his face without the slightest trace of blood. The masked man looked at him, then reached out and took out a small cloth bag. He shook it in front of He Changxing's eyes. Suddenly there was a sha-sha sound, like sand rolling, but also like the sound of countless insects rubbing and biting each other. He Changxing's mouth cried out, "Ah!" Twice his eyes stiffened, with indescribable fear staring at that small bag. After a moment, his lower body was wet. The masked person put down the bag, took out another item, it was an eye mask, and then slowly put it on He Changxing's face, quietly said, "Let's begin." He Changxing wailed, struggled with all his might, but right now like a fish on the chopping board. In the end, it was useless. Soon his eyes were covered by a black blindfold, and he was completely drowned in darkness. An icy chill, like a merciless blade, fell on his right wrist. He Changxing's body instantly began to tremble violently, but the icy cold intent seemed to be indestructible. In an instant, it seeped into his flesh and blood and pressed down fiercely. Drip! He Changxing suddenly held his breath. Drip! The surroundings suddenly turned dark, a stretch of silence, only that soft but clear sound, like a drop of water falling. Drip! The sound of every drop seemed to have the same interval. Every drop of water was like a terrible hammer, fiercely beating his soul. Every blow was enough to make one's soul fly away and scatter. However, the nightmare did not seem to be over. In that terrible and clear dripping sound, suddenly there was a thin sha-sha sound, like the sound of insects crawling, echoing in his ears. A frighteningly cold and numb feeling came from his wound. He Changxing could no longer bear it, let out a heart-wrenching roar, but all the sound, in the end, was blocked in the depths of his throat. The night wind was bleak, someone blew out the candles, darkness surged, plunging the world into a shadow. The masked person slowly stood up, coldly looking at the person in front of him, whose entire body was like sifting chaff, to the point that he did not even look like a human, put away the small bag in his hand, then turned and walked out. Behind him, in the small twisted tunnels on the ground, bright red liquid was slowly dripping, making an orderly sound. When the door opened, there was a low squeak sound. Looking at the world outside the house, it was already late at night. He closed the door, walked to the dark side of the road, and sat down under the big tree. The dark shadow of the tree was hazy, covering his figure. After a moment, a black shadow walked out from behind the tree. It was a black dog, sniffing around and coming to his side. The masked person took off his mask. With the dim light, the outline of his face could be seen clearly. It was Lu Chun. He looked a little tired. Even the light in his eyes was a little dim. Atsu stood in the darkness, staring at him. After a while, it leaned over, gently rubbing its head against Lu Chun's arm. Lu Chun reached out and hugged it, gently touched Atsu's head and whispered, "It's done." Atsu let out a low whimper, as if in response to his words. Lu Chun looked up at the dark night. A trace of complex emotions flashed through the depths of his eyes. After a moment, he picked up the small bag. Atsu's eyes stared at the small bag, unblinking. Lu Chun also looked at the small bag, looked for a while, and suddenly said to Atsu, "You see, I was right? There are so many people in this world. They believe whatever others say." He gently loosened his hand. The rope at the mouth of the bag fell. In the night wind, the sand inside was blown up by the wind, drifting into the quiet and cold depths of the night. Chapter 141. When the morning light shone, Lu Chun walked out of the door yawning. Together with many other servant disciples, he walked towards the direction of the fragrance garden. Along the way, he met many fellow disciples he knew, and they greeted each other. One or two of them who were more familiar with him even joked with him. "Did you not sleep well last night?" "I didn't sleep enough. I work every day. I'm exhausted." Lu Chun shook his head and sighed. The servant disciples beside him all nodded. It seemed that everyone felt the same way. The various rules of the Kunlun party, such as squeezing the servant disciples and worshipping the talented ones, had long been an open secret. But no matter what, the Kunlun party was still a righteous sect, and it would still give the servant disciples a little hope. As long as one's luck and talent were all there was still a chance for them to make a name for themselves. The hope was small, but the beauty of immortality was enough to make people willing to fight for it. They chatted along the way, and when they reached the fragrance garden, the sun had already risen and shone on the vast herb garden. The wind that blew against their faces also brought with it the unique fragrance of the fragrance garden. Many servant disciples were like diligent bees, flying to their own spiritual fields. Lu Chun also walked among the crowd, and came to the place where the eagle fruit tree was planted. When he stood on the ridge beside the spiritual field, he could not help but look up at the sky. The sky was bright, and the sun was bright. It was a good day. The rest of the people soon arrived, and after a while Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng, the two Jindan friar, also arrived. Just as everyone was about to start, Lin Sheng, who was calling the roll, suddenly frowned and said loudly, "Wait a minute, one person is missing." Everyone stopped in their tracks in shock and looked back. Melaleuca japonica was also a little surprised, and said, "Such a good opportunity. Is there still someone who doesn't know what's good for him? Who is it?" Lin Sheng looked at the list in his hand, and then looked at the servant disciples standing there, including Lu Chun and the others. After a moment of silence he said to Melaleuca japonica, "A disciple named He Changxing is not here." Melaleuca japonica snorted and said, "He doesn't know what's good for him. Forget it, ignore him. We can't let so many people stand here and wait for him. Let's start." This was completely reasonable, and Lin Sheng had no objection. He immediately ordered everyone to go into the spiritual field to cultivate the eagle fruit tree. At the same time, he looked at the path they had come from, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. Yen Luo was the one who had called for this, but he was the one who had chosen these servant disciples. Now that He Changxing was absent for no reason, even though Yen Luo had no intention of blaming him, this situation was a slap to his face. Lin Sheng thought that when this guy came later, he would definitely give him a stern lecture. As for the one who was selected in the end, it seemed that he could not choose this guy. Lin Sheng thought so in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. He just turned around and looked at the busy disciples in the spiritual field. Lin Sheng's idea of giving He Changxing a good scolding never came true, because He Changxing did not come for the whole morning. By noon, Lin Sheng's face had begun to turn a little pale, and everyone except for Melaleuca japonica secretly distanced themselves from him. In the middle, Melaleuca japonica turned her head to look at him again, but she did not say anything. Arranging the management of the servant disciples was Lin Sheng's job, and it was fine for her to say a few words, but if she interfered too much, it would be crossing the line. Another hour passed, and Lin Sheng finally could not stand it anymore. He called for a disciple on guard beside him, and ordered him to find He Changxing. At this moment, Lin Sheng had already made up his mind. If He Changxing could not give a good reason when he came, he would deal with him on the spot and chase this audacious servant disciple out of Fragrance Garden. The disciple on guard received the order and left. The surrounding people, including the busy servant disciples in the spiritual field, were also secretly paying attention to this side. Some of them did not make a sound, but there were also a few who had smiles on their faces. It seemed that they were glad that they had one less opponent. The quiet mountain breeze blew through the herb garden, and the sunlight from the sky seemed to be gentle as well. After less than an hour, the commotion suddenly came from outside the grass garden. The noise seemed to come from afar, but because it was too far away, it could not be heard clearly. However, there seemed to be a few shrill screams mixed in, and then it quickly spread towards the flowing fragrance garden. At the edge of the spiritual field, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng had the highest level of cultivation, so they were the first to notice a trace of abnormality. They turned to look at the same time, and not long after, they saw the disciple on guard rush over with a pale face. He suddenly threw himself in front of Lin Sheng, and then with a look of horror on his face he stammered, He is dead. What? The news of He Changxing's sudden death spread in the blink of an eye in Fragrance Garden. At first everyone was still surprised, but very quickly, many people felt that something was not quite right. The Kunlun party suddenly sent a lot of people to directly seal off the area, forbidding everyone from approaching He Changxing's house. Lin Sheng and Melaleuca japonica were the first to arrive at the place, but they did not come out from the house. In the afternoon, the two Yuanying Zhenren of Baichaotang, Qiandeng and Mingzhu also rushed over, and walked into the house with a solemn face. A little later, it was dusk, and under the countless watchful eyes, the head of Kunlun Zhenren Idle Month also came over with a gloomy face. In the huge Kunlun party, it seemed that a storm was coming. All kinds of rumors spread wildly in the Kunlun party about what happened in the house, why the usually inconspicuous disciple suddenly died, and how it could attract the attention of so many powerful high-level Zhenren. There were countless versions of answers to these questions. Some said that the disciple had been squeezed too much, and the pain was unbearable, and he felt that his future was hopeless, so he committed suicide in despair. Someone scoffed and sneered. What do you know? It's clear that the guy was bullied a few days ago, and he couldn't take it anymore, so he died. As for who bullied him, there were only a few bold and evil people in the Kunlun party today. Think about it yourself. Anyway, some people did things in a disgusting way, so be careful of retribution. Someone else said with certainty that the reason why it attracted the attention of so many Zhenren was that the situation in the house was too tragic. The house was full of blood, and it was a horrible sight, like hell on earth. Someone next to him asked, how can a person commit suicide to make the house and the ground covered in blood? Then there was a bout of racking their brains to think about it. In the evening, the news gradually became clearer. There was indeed a murder in the house, and someone died, and the deceased was He Changxing. He Changxing died a very, very tragic death. But as for how tragic it was, none of the people who did not enter the house could tell. None of the people who entered the house wanted to speak. At most, they would say the word tragic, with an ugly expression on their faces when they were cornered. When night fell, the Kunlun party had surrounded the house and the surrounding area of dozens of feet. The other disciples who lived in the surrounding area had all been carefully questioned, and after confirming that there were no suspicions, they were arranged to stay. As a result, the place that had been bustling yesterday was as deserted as a ghost town today. Lu Chen lived very far away, so he was not affected, and no one came to question him. So when it was dark, he stayed alone in his house, let Atsu lie on his lap, and began to help it untie the cloth. The blood-stained white cloth was thrown aside, revealing the hideous and ugly wounds. From time to time, Atsu's body would twitch in pain, but most of the time, it still endured the pain and lay there obediently. Some of the wounds were almost healed, so Luchin did not care anymore. He only replaced the most seriously injured parts. It seemed that less than half of Atsu's body was still wrapped in white cloth, and it seemed to be more pleasing to the eye than before. But it seemed to be a little uglier, because now Atsu only had one eye and half a tail. When it stood, its limp was getting worse. Only the terrifying scars on its face seemed to add a little more murderous aura to it, making it look a lot fiercer. It's almost healed. Luchin looked at the black dog in front of him, then patted its head and said softly. Atsu responded to him and wagged its tail. Luchin looked at it and saw that half of its tail was wagging, which looked a little funny and weird. He could not help but sigh, then he smiled and said, "When it's healed, you have to be careful when you go out to play." In Atsu's one eye, a dark green light flashed, and then it leaned its head on Luchin's knee, quietly snuggling up to him. And in a place that Luchin could not see, under the layer of dark green light, there was a very faint black, swaying a little. Luchin looked out of the window. The dark night was endless, and his expression was also indifferent. After a moment, he waved his hand, and the candlelight in the room dimmed. "Go to sleep, we'll see what happens tomorrow." The next day, it was still a good weather. The sun hung high in the sky, it was clear and cloudy. The sky was bright, the universe was bright. However, a shadow had already shrouded the Kunlun party. Updated news came out. It only said that a few Yuanying Jinren, led by Jinren Idol Month, were furious. The reason was in that house He Changsheng, who died a horrible death, may have been killed by the people of the Devil Sect of the Three Realms. This was the first time in decades that the Devil Sect killed so brazenly in the Kunlun Mountains, and they showed their horses and carriages, directly revealing their identity. Of course, this was undoubtedly a painful slap in the face of the entire Kunlun sect. How could the Idol Moon Immortal and the others not be incomparably furious? While he was dealing with He Changsheng's funeral affairs, he was also cursing the person in charge of the patrolling guards, until his face was covered in dirt. When the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, of the Kunlun party, Dukan Jinren, was summoned to Jinren Idol Month's place, he saw a few Jin Dan friar, who were usually high and mighty, retreating with a pale face. Jinren Idol Month seemed to still be angry, his face was livid, he only nodded when he saw Dukan Jinren. Then he did not say any empty words, he directly asked Dukan Jinren, "Your disciple He, how is he now?" Chapter 142. Only Taoist Master Xianyu and Taoist Master Du Kong were left in the Heavenly Kuan Peaks Xingyang Hall. There were no outsiders present. In addition, the two of them were very familiar with each other, so they spoke much more casually. However, Tao Master Du Kong couldn't help but be startled when he heard Tao Master Xianyu's question. He replied, "He's still in closed-door meditation." "Senior brother Sect Master Yu." Tao Master Xianyu sighed. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stretched out his hand and gestured for Tao Master Dukong to sit down with him. Then he called for someone to serve hot tea. Tao Master Xianyu signaled the servant boy to withdraw from the main hall. Then Tao Master Xianyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. Suddenly, he heard Tao Master Du Kong praise the tea. Then he cast a sidelong glance at him and said, "This tea is Little Crane." Dukan Jinren nodded. As the Kunlun party's Heavenly Soldier Hall's first seat for many years, he had seen all kinds of things. However, he smiled bitterly and sighed. "This Little Crane tea is indeed excellent, but I probably won't be able to get it from the Yi family in the future." As for why he couldn't get the famous Little Crane tea, Dukan Jinren did not say, but these two highly respected perfected ones naturally knew in their hearts. It must be because of the incident where he gang bullied the Yi family's young lady. Now that the Yi family and the Kunlun sect were like fire and water, they naturally couldn't get the tea. Dukan Jinren shook his head and stopped thinking about these stupid things. He turned to Perfected Idol Month and said seriously, "Senior brother, you called me here and suddenly asked about my disciple He. What's the reason?" Perfected Idol Month nodded and pondered for a while. There was a murder case at Fragrance Garden a few days ago. Did you hear about the death of a servant disciple? Dukan Jinren nodded and said, I've heard about it, but I haven't been there to take a look. I only know some rough information. What's wrong, senior brother? Perfected Idol Month casually took out a scroll from her bosom and passed it to him. She said lightly, It's about the situation in the house. Take a look for yourself. Dukan Jinren took it with some doubts. He first glanced at Perfected Idol Month, then lowered his head and began to flip through it. But as he read, his eyebrows frowned slightly, his expression became more and more solemn. For a moment, in the huge Xingyang hall, there was only the sound of him flipping pages. After a while, Dukan Jinren finished looking at everything. His face had already become somewhat unsightly. He said in a deep voice, The evil cult is actually so insolent. They are really going too far. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and looked at Perfected Idol Month. After hesitating for a while, he said, Senior brother, such a thing happened, and you suddenly asked about he just now. Could it be that you want him to let him come to see me? Perfected Idol Month stretched out her fingers and rubbed between her eyebrows. She said lightly, I know you have high expectations of he, but his younger brother did indeed provoke public anger in the matter a few days ago. As the elder brother, he also did something wrong. It's inevitable to punish him. A trace of joy appeared on Dukan Jinren's face. He stood up and said, Of course. In fact, if it wasn't for senior brother sect leader, who came forward to mediate for me that day, Qiandeng and Mingzhu from Baichao Tang might not have been willing to let this matter go so easily. I have always been grateful for this. Perfected Idol Month nodded. She looked at Dukan Jinren with a trace of satisfaction in her eyes. She said, It's good that you know what you are doing. After the battle in the desolate valley 10 years ago, the evil cult has been on the decline for many years. Very few people in the sect had contact with those evildoers. Only your disciple, He, met with an accident in the land of chaos a few years ago. He fought with the remnants of the evil cult several times. I heard that it was a few years? 3 years. Dukan Jinren immediately replied. That child is strong-willed and unyielding. Because his family members died in the hands of the evil cult's demons, he hated the evil cult to the core. Therefore, he fought with those evildoers in the land of chaos for a long time. After 3 years, both sides suffered heavy losses before he returned to the mountain. But in terms of understanding the situation of the evil cult in our sect, there's no one better than him. Perfected Idol Month smiled and said, I also thought of this, so of course if you think that he is in closed-door cultivation and it will affect his progress, it's not good for me. Absolutely not. Dukan Jinren immediately opened his mouth and said resolutely and decisively, Senior Martial Brother, I'm not an old fool. This is a chance that Senior Martial Brother is giving him, allowing him to come out of closed-door cultivation in advance. And the aristocratic families in Kunwa City can't say anything in front of the threat of the evil cult. We, master and disciple, will always remember this kindness in our hearts. Perfected Idol Month smiled and seemed to be a bit emotional. She said, It's good that you know. All these years, there have always been people who are dissatisfied with my position as the sect head. They always say that when my master retired to the Winter Peak, the position of sect head should have been passed on to martial uncle Tianlan. Alas, junior martial brothers like Qiandeng and Mingzhu also have ambiguous attitudes towards this. Only you, who have been in charge of the Heavenly Soldier Hall for many years, have always firmly stood on my side. Dukan Jinren sneered and said, Senior martial brother, don't be angry. Who doesn't know what those people are thinking? They just want to take the opportunity to suppress us so that they can occupy more things on the strange peak in the sky. Ridiculous. What's more, when the position was passed on, we were all standing in this Zhengyang Hall. Even Martial Uncle Tianlan hasn't said anything yet. Since when did they have the right to complain? He cupped his hands and said seriously, Senior Martial Brother, don't worry. Those clowns definitely can't overturn the sky. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, Martial Uncle Bai Chun is still on the Winter Peak. I don't think they dare to act recklessly. I'll call He over to greet Senior Martial Brother now. If you have any instructions, just tell me. I'll ask that kid to do his best to help you catch this evildoer of the evil cult hiding in the dark. He definitely won't let Senior Marshal Brother down. Immortal Idol Month nodded with a smile and said, "That's good." Dukan Jinren turned around and left. He walked vigorously and was obviously very happy. For a person of his cultivation and temperament, this was also rare. However, from this, it could be seen that Dukan Jinren really liked his disciple He from the bottom of his heart, and had deep expectations for him. Encountering this kind of thing, he seemed to be happier than encountering a happy event. Immortal Idol Month watched Dukan Jinren leave. He was the only one left in the huge Xingyang Hall. He turned around and sat silently for a while. Suddenly, he sighed softly and his face showed some inexplicable tiredness. With his master, who was a perfected lord of Huashan sect, still alive and he was sitting in the position of sect leader, those people still dared to make irresponsible remarks from time to time. Did they really have the guts? With just a few perfected masters in the Yuanying realm? Immortal Idol Month smiled bitterly and his face gradually became heavy. He was afraid that those people had someone backing them up. In the fragrant garden, the competition to plant the eagle fruit tree was disrupted by this sudden murder. Not to mention the others, even the leader, Melaleuca japonica and the two Jindan friar Lin Sheng, had not returned for a few days. The remaining odd job disciples looked at each other and did not know what to do. However, life still had to go on. In these days when all kinds of rumors were spreading wildly, everyone still came to the spiritual field as usual. Although they did not know if the competition could continue, they still had to do their work. It was just that some people slacked, some worked more, and some seemed to be especially serious. This person who was especially diligent and serious was Lu Chen. Every day when it was time for him to work, he did not slack off and honestly did all the things that he had to do. When he was free, he would gather with the others on the ridge of the fields and discuss the ups and downs of the past few days in a lively manner. He talked about that unfortunate person who died a violent death, and together they imagined that if it was really the evil cult's doing, what kind of legendary evildoers would be like, and so on and so forth. Everyone did not have much opinion of the gentle and polite Lu Chen. Some even kindly reminded him not to waste his effort. Seeing that the two uncle masters Yen and Lin had not returned for a few days, this matter was probably going to be ruined. Even if it was not ruined, they would at least have to compete again when the time came. Otherwise, if they were not here for the past few days, who could tell if there was anything fishy? Lu Chen smiled and did not say anything. He nodded in agreement, but he still did what he had to do, and the others did not bother to criticize him. After another 2 days, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng returned to the grass garden. It seemed that the sect had other arrangements for the two of them after hearing about the murder case. But even though they were back, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng did not look too good, and they seemed to be in a bad mood. Then, as most people expected, they directly ignored the results of the few days of absence and announced to the crowd that the competition was invalid. They would organize another competition in a few days, and then try to pick out a suitable candidate. In the crowd, Lu Chen was silent, but the people around him were all smiling. Occasionally, some of Lu Chen's peers would come over to tease him, pat him on the shoulder, and then earnestly teach Lu Chen things like, "If you don't listen to your elders, you will suffer." Lu Chen also smiled bitterly, and then nodded, saying that everyone was right, that he really did not understand this principle, and that he had to focus on his cultivation in the future. In short, this matter seemed to be over for the time being. However, 1 day later, there was a sudden change that no one expected. Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng once again gathered the crowd, and then with a complicated expression, they announced to everyone that there would be no more competitions in the future. This time, the candidate had been selected to work for the most popular genius of the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. The person who would grow the eagle fruit tree for her was called Lu Chen. The crowd was in an uproar, and when they looked over, even Lu Chen was dumbfounded, as if he did not know what was going on, and had a puzzled look on his face. The crowd surrounded the two Jindan friar and kept asking questions. And then Melaleuca japonica calmly said that it did not matter who said it, because it was Su Qingjun who had directly selected the candidate. The crowd was shocked and even more confused, and everyone kept talking at once. Melaleuca japonica, on the other hand, looked at Luchin from afar with a meaningful look in her eyes, and a playful smile appeared on her lips. Chapter 143. So what do I say? Are you going to thank me? After knocking on Luchen's door and walking in, Exian leaned against the table with a smug look on her face, giggling as she spoke to Luchin. Luchin nodded repeatedly and said with a straight face, "Of course it's all thanks to Miss Yi's sharp eyes that I had this opportunity." Exian looked even happier. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said proudly, "It can't be helped, I'm just so smart." That day, I ran into Sister Sue on the road. Although I only spoke a few words to her, I could tell from her words that she was very concerned about the eagle fruits. So I thought, if I don't care about other people's matters, how could she not care about herself? Since Marshal Aunt Yen and Marshal Aunt Lin aren't around, she'll definitely go and take a look herself, right? Luchin nodded repeatedly. Yes, as if he had suddenly seen the light. You're really too smart, too quick-witted. Exian sighed, a pained expression on her face as she said, "It's a pity that the others all think they're so smart. Whenever there's a chance, they'll slack off. Sister Sue is secretly watching from the side, so of course she won't like it. So looking at your diligent appearance and the fact that you've cultivated the eagle fruits well, it'd be strange if she didn't choose you. So," she said to Luchin in a serious tone, "Brother Lu, in the future, you should remember this lesson. Don't be reckless, don't be lazy." Okay, I'll remember it all. Whatever you say is right." Luchin chuckled, as if no matter what Exian said, he would listen with infinite patience. So much so that Exian herself was a little embarrassed from bragging. She blushed and glared at him. "Whatever, did I help you this time?" Exian asked. "You've been a great help," Luchin said. Exian stretched out her hand and said with a smile, "Then why don't you give me some benefits? Hand it over quickly. How about I devote myself to you?" "What?" Exian was startled. She blushed and said, "Hey, Brother Lu, you're not being serious again. What are you talking about?" Luchin laughed and waved his hand. "I'm just kidding. How can you joke around like this all the time? When we first met in the land of chaos, you even asked me to marry you. You're too shameless." Luchin laughed and said, "I asked you to repay me with your body, but you're not willing. If it's my turn to repay you with my body, you're still not willing. Wow, you're too difficult to talk to. Hey, can't you talk nicely, Brother Lu?" Exian looked like she was about to jump on the table in anger. Her face was red and even her eyes were watery. Luchin shrugged and pulled her to sit down. Then he said with a smile, Okay, let's not joke around. I'm more than 10 years older than you. I can't bully a little girl like you. Oh, but speaking of gifts, I really don't know what to give you." Exian suddenly raised her head and looked at him. Luchin didn't notice. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then he said, "How about this? I don't have anything good with me now. When you find a suitable husband in the future, on the day of your wedding, I'll give you the best gift, okay?" "On the day of my wedding?" Exian still looked a little shy, but her eyes were bright and clear, like gentle water ripples, flickering with beautiful, ever-changing, sparkling glimmers as she asked softly. Luchin said with a smile, "Yes." Exian looked at him for a while. Then she suddenly giggled and said, "Okay, but you said it yourself. You must want the best thing, the best gift." Luchin stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "A gentleman's word." Exian nodded her head heavily. She also extended her fair palm and clapped it on his palm. With a clear and melodious sound, she said loudly, "It's a promise." Their palms touched for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of an unusual softness in their palms. Luchin withdrew his hand and walked to the side of the bed to sit down. As if he suddenly thought of something, he said to himself, Let me think, I can't be considered a gentleman. Hey!" Exian jumped 8 feet high. She rushed over and pushed him down angrily. Luchin fell on the bed and laughed. Exian found it funny and angry at the same time. She stretched out her hand and hit him a few times. She said angrily, "You're too bad, too bad. You just made a promise and you want to renege on it. You're too bad. The sky was clear and bright, and the world was clear and bright. The majestic Kunlun mountain range stood on the earth. It was like a majestic giant. In its embrace, there were countless living beings. It also hid unknown darkness and shadows. When the warm sunlight fell on the house, everything looked so quiet and peaceful. There was almost no one around. Therefore, the sound of footsteps that broke the silence was unusually clear and loud. Two people came. They were Dukhan Jinren and his disciple Hei. There were disciples guarding a place about 10 feet away from the house. However, after Hei handed over Immortal Idol Month's letter, they quickly stepped aside. Several gazes fell on Hei's face. It seemed that they were more interested in this young man than the respected Dukhan Jinren. Hei's face was somewhat similar to his younger brother Hegang. Of course, that was before Hegang's face was disfigured. They hadn't seen each other for many days. Perhaps it was because he had been in seclusion in the cave for a long time without seeing the sun. Hei's face looked a little pale. However, other than that, he was full of spirit and energy. His expression was calm. It seemed that he had not been affected by that incident at all. When they walked to the door of the house, Dukhan Jinren stopped. Hei, who had been half a step behind him, also stopped. There was no one around. Dukhan Jinren looked at his disciple. His eyes finally showed a trace of relief. He smiled and said, "Actually, when I agreed to sect leader senior brother's request, I was still a little worried for you. However, this opportunity was too rare for you. I could only snatch it first." Hei's face showed a trace of gratitude. He lowered his head and said softly, "Master's kindness is too great. It's really hard for this disciple to repay you. However, seeing you like this, I am also relieved." Dukhan Jinren didn't care. He smiled and said, "I was worried that the incident would be too big of a blow to you. It would affect your temperament and confuse your cultivation. Now it seems that not only have you not been affected, but you have also made progress. You should be only one step away from breaking through the Jindan realm, right?" He smiled. His face was calm and determined. He didn't say anything. Dukhan Jinren nodded and said, "You are right. You have not achieved your potential yet. You should hide and endure. If you can use this setback as a sharpening, it will be very beneficial to your cultivation in the future." As he spoke, he seemed to think of something. He smiled faintly and said, "Now everyone in the sect thinks that Su Qingjun is a genius. I don't think so. In the future, her achievements may not be able to surpass yours." Even with Hei's calm temperament, he was shocked when he heard this. He said, "Master, what do you mean?" "Su Qingjun has her own talent. She is indeed powerful. However, the reason why she can break through the Jindan realm so early is that the Su family and her master Mu Yuan have been sparing no effort to accumulate all kinds of spiritual materials and resources. This is also an important reason. The Su family hopes that there will be another Yuanying Jinren in their family. For this, they can do anything. As far as I know, her master Mu Yuan has an even greater ambition than Yuanying Jinren." Hei's expression changed slightly. He said softly, "You mean martial uncle Mu Yuan wants junior sister Su to become a perfected cultivator?" "Of course." Dukhan Jinren sneered and said, "Mu Yuan is the leader of the iron branch of our sect. He has long been dissatisfied with the decline of the iron branch for many years. However, with his ability, how can he shake the Kuanji? After all, there are two perfected cultivators by Chen and Tianlan in the Kuanji. Therefore, if the iron branch wants to prosper, the only hope is for a peerless genius to rise up and become a perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm. In this way, there will naturally be a storm and a meteoric rise." He was silent. After a moment he nodded and said, "Master is right. It's no wonder that Shirbua Kihara takes good care of junior sister Su. I heard that he is extremely demanding in his cultivation. He doesn't allow any mistakes and doesn't allow any regrets." At this point, he also smiled and said, "It must be hard for junior sister Su to cultivate under such heavy pressure and bravely advance all the way to where she is today." Dao Master Du Kong smiled mischievously. There was a look of disapproval on his face as he said, It's still too early. Let's wait and watch the show. He paused for a moment, then looked at He and said, in short, the path of cultivation is long and dangerous. You still have a long way to go. Xiao Yi, you have talent, but in the future, you must be able to calm your heart and cultivate in peace. Only then will you be able to achieve great things. He took a step back and bowed deeply to Dukanjinren. He said in a low voice, I will remember Master's teachings. Dukanjinren nodded and said, that's all. Just remember it. Let's go in. He said, yes. He stepped forward and prepared to push the door. Dukanjinren said, this matter is related to the evil faction. It is of great importance. Sect head Shixiang attaches great importance to it. You must investigate carefully and try to catch the murderer as soon as possible. Find out the truth. He said, yes, disciple understands. With a creaking sound, the two doors were pushed open by his hands. A gloomy aura gushed out from the room. It seemed that the light from the outside could not penetrate the room for a while, but a strange and unpleasant smell wafted out. He was about to walk in when he suddenly heard Dukanjinren sneer behind him. He turned his head and said, Master, what's wrong? Dukanjinren said, nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. I can't help but laugh at Mu Yuan's wishful thinking. What is it? Perfected Dukong said leisurely. Mu Yuan has great ambitions. He did everything he could to help his disciple attain golden core, even earlier than the two perfected lords, Bai Chun and Tian Lan. Everyone in Kunlun thinks that he's a peerless genius. But he only cares about being happy. He did not think about whether the two powerful peerless Shinran of Kunlun are happy about their Tieji's method or not. With that, Dukanjinren laughed alone. He stood at the side and looked at the house not far away. Looking at the deep darkness inside, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Chapter 144. The wind blew from afar, blew into this enclosed house, and then the sunlight shone down. Everything seemed to become gentle and warm, dispelling the darkness and coldness that was once hidden here. He and Dukanjinren walked into the house. There was a strange aura in this room. It carried a lingering fishy smell. Dao Master Dukong stopped at the doorstep for a moment. He frowned and waved his hand in front of him. What's this smell? Why is it so strong? In contrast, he did not have too obvious reaction. He quickly walked forward and opened the window. As the light shone in, the scene in the house was immediately revealed before their eyes. Bright red. This was the first shocking scene that they saw. The white walls of the house and the floor were covered in a blood-red color, as if countless people's blood had been splashed on them. It was a ghastly sight. Moreover, it seemed as if the blood of countless people had been deliberately painted on them, forming a complicated and incomprehensible pattern. He looked at the bloody patterns on the wall, his pupils slightly contracted, then turned his head, looked into the house bit by bit, and finally landed on the ground in the middle of the house. There was an empty space. Looking at the curved length, it seemed to be a human shape. He turned and glanced at Dukanjinren. Dukanjinren nodded and said, he died there. He squatted down, looked at the finger-thick cracks on the ground. In the cracks, there were still many remnants of bright red, just that many places had already dried, looked like blackened blood stains. How is it, did you see anything? Dukanjinren asked behind him. He looked somewhat solemn, frowned and after a moment of silence said, the blood pattern formation in this house is called reincarnation formation. It is an extremely high-level formation in the evil sect. Ordinary disciples are unable to set it. His finger lightly brushed past the edge of a crack on the ground. It was unusually not rough, and at a glance, almost all the cracks, thicknesses, and sizes were exactly the same. One could imagine what a horrifying scene it would be if there were countless amounts of fresh blood flowing through these cracks. Let's not talk about the cultivation level of the person who set up this formation. But this technique is extremely authentic. He's voice sounded a little low, but his eyes were unusually bright and sharp, as if two balls of fire were burning in them. The array patterns, the positions, the angles, the spiritual energy, the 8 gates of life and death, the Tao of reincarnation, and all the important parts of the reincarnation array, he set them up perfectly. Dukan Jinren walked to his side and said in a low voice, "You mean," he coldly said, "there is no way to fake this kind of formation. It must be the work of a core member of the evil cult. Moreover, his position must be extremely high. Only then can he have such a skillful and authentic method." Dukan Jinren took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, I will immediately go back and report this matter to sect head senior brother. Xiao Yi, I will leave this matter to you. I will also leave sect head senior brother's warrant with you. If necessary, you can deploy some of our Kunlun party's hidden resources. At the same time, with this warrant, no one below Jin Dan Friar can refuse to answer your questions." "What if it is a Yuanying realm Shirshu or Shirbua?" he suddenly asked. Dukan Jinren's expression changed slightly. He looked at He Yi and said, "What do you mean by this?" He Yi's expression did not change. He only said softly, "I just want to be safe, so I asked first." Dukan Jinren seemed to be hesitant about this question. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Yuanying Jinren's side is indeed not easy to handle. But this matter involves the evil cult. The responsibility is huge. Let's do it this way. If you really need to ask any Yuanying Jinren, it's better to report to sect head senior brother first. Let him decide and summon them. Otherwise, your way of doing things is really too easy to offend people." He nodded and said, "Thank you, Master, for your understanding." Dukan Jinren sighed. He took another look at the bloody scene in the room. He could not help but cursed in a low voice. He then turned around and left. He did not leave with his master. From this moment onwards, his biggest mission was to start tracking down that mysterious evil cult member. He slowly walked to the white wall. He carefully looked at those blood-colored patterns. He then leaned forward and sniffed. Then he used his hand to lightly rub on a red mark. It was indeed cinnabar. He Yi's eyes revealed a look of understanding. But then a trace of deep worry flashed past. The evil cult had been on the decline for many years. He had not heard of such a person for a long time. Could it be that a demon from the evil cult who had been living in seclusion for many years had suddenly appeared? But if it was that kind of demon, why would he make a move on He Changsheng, such an unremarkable person who was not even an official disciple, and even set up such a terrifying reincarnation formation? Was it worth it? Was it not worth it? He stood in the room with his brows tightly furrowed. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. He slowly turned around and looked at the blood-red color that was almost everywhere around him. At a certain moment, he seemed to have a strange illusion. It was as if he was surrounded by a dense blood-red fog that surrounded him. And in the depths of the fog, there must be a huge secret. He slowly closed his eyes. Standing in this silent and lonely blood-red room, there seemed to be soundless waves around him. But he did not seem to feel it. He only softly muttered to himself, "Who are you? What do you want to do?" Lu Chen left the fragrance garden. Under the envious gaze of many people, he went to Su Qingjuan's cave abode. As the most prominent young genius of the Kunlun party, the newly promoted Jin Dan, and Su Qingjun, who had a strong background, naturally lived in an extraordinary place. It was on a Ziyun peak that was filled with spiritual power. Halfway up the mountain, there was a large cave abode that was opened up in the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the situation where the servant disciples lived in groups, there were only 4 caves on the entire Ziyun peak. And on the side of the Flying Goose platform, there was only Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Looking from afar, one could see the immortal's qi rising and the clouds rolling down the cliff. Ancient trees and old vines could be seen everywhere. In the distance, there were cries of apes and birds nearby. It could be said to be an immortal's paradise. It was the immortal's cave abode that every cultivator in the world dreamed of. Standing on the Flying Goose platform, Lu Chen was also a little emotional and dazed. He did not speak for a long time. "Are you stunned?" A sweet voice came from the side. It was Xian. Lu Chen sighed and said, "Yes, this person is too different from other people." It was rare that Xian did not argue with him. Looking at the picturesque scenery in front of her, a look of envy appeared on her face. She said, "Indeed, when I came here for the first time, I was also stunned." As she spoke, Xian shrugged and said to Lu Chen, "Come, I'll bring you there." That day, Su Qingjun had something to do and was not in the cave abode. However, everything had already been discussed by everyone. Exian only brought Lu Chen here to familiarize himself with the way. When Su Qingjun returned later, she would naturally talk to Lu Chen. According to the previous arrangement, the person who cultivated fresh eagle fruits for Su Qingjun would follow Su Qingjun and live in her cave abode for a period of time. However, in reality, it wasn't quite accurate to say that they were in a cave abode. Generally speaking, the entire Soaring Goose Terrace was actually within the range of Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Walking on it meant that they were in her cave abode. However, the cave abode where Su Qingjun usually lived and cultivated referred to the wide stone cave that was opened on the side of the mountain wall of the Flying Goose platform. Usually, the cave door was closed and outsiders could not enter. The place where Lu Chen was going to stay was a mountain forest, more than 100 feet away from the cave door. There was a spiritual field here, which was full of spiritual power and fertile land. Bai Chaotang had also transplanted the 7 best eagle fruit trees here. In the following time, Lu Chen's task was to take care of these eagle fruit trees. Once the eagle fruit was found to be ripe, he must immediately inform Su Qingjun in the cave abode, and let her eat it as soon as possible. Then, the medicine would circulate through all the meridians in her body without any loss. From then on, she would achieve the perfect Jin Dan state. However, at this time, Lu Chen was frowning and staring blankly at the side of the spiritual field. It was obviously a newly built hut. "Am I going to live here?" he asked Exian. Exian glared at him and said angrily, "Isn't that nonsense? Do you really want to live in the cave abode over there?" Lu Chen shook his head and said with emotion, "Not really. But isn't it too shabby to prepare a hut for me? Hey, you're just a servant disciple. Don't talk as if you're already Jin Dan Friar, okay?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "You girl, your mouth is so poisonous. Be careful that no one will dare to want you in the future." "Bah, none of your business." Exian snorted, and then walked over to open the door of the hut. She took a look inside, and then turned back with a smile. "Brother Lu, it looks not bad." Lu Chen smiled and walked over. He stood in the hut and looked around. The hut was neither big nor small. There was a bed and a table inside. It could be considered simple and plain. "Anyway, I'll make do," he said with a smile. "I don't ask for too much for the workers." Exian laughed and walked to the door again. She said, "Brother Lu, your hut is more than 10 feet away from the door of Sister Sue's cave abode. When the eagle fruit ripens, will you make it in time to call her?" "I'll make it in time," Lu Chen said carelessly. "As long as it doesn't exceed 10 minutes, the primitive spiritual energy of the eagle fruit won't dissipate. It doesn't matter. Of course, unless she leaves here and isn't in the cave abode. If that's the case, I can't do anything no matter how capable I am." Exian said with a smile. "Don't worry about this. I heard from Martial Uncle Yen that he has discussed it with Sister Sue. She will only do this during this period of time. Unless something big happens, she won't leave the cave abode." Lu Chen narrowed his eyes and then nodded with a smile. "That's good." Chapter 145. Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace abode on Purple Cloud Peak in the afternoon. By this time, Exian had already left. Lu Chen put down his luggage, tidied up the hut, and went to work in the spirit field outside the hut. The spirit field was about 2 acres in size. The 7 eagle fruit trees were transplanted here, spaced very loosely between each other. This was also to provide these precious spirit materials with sufficient spirit energy and nutrition. Lu Chen carefully looked at the eagle fruit trees one by one. After he had an idea, he chose a few trees that looked the most likely to bear fruit first and cultivated them. When he was tired, he sat down on the embankment to rest. Looking at the hut on the other side, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He muttered to himself, "After living in a hut for so long, I finally managed to live in a brick house, and now I'm living in a hut. I'm really regressing." "What do you mean regressing?" A clear and melodious voice came from behind him. Lu Chen turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing on the embankment not far away. She was looking at him. Lu Chen laughed and stood up. "I was just joking. It's fine." Su Qingjun didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at Lu Chen seriously and said, Lu Chen, the eagle fruit tree is very important to my cultivation. I don't want anything to go wrong. Lu Chen was stunned. He seemed to have never expected that Su Qingjun would actually attach such importance to this matter. So he straightened his expression and said, Don't worry, senior sister Su. I fought hard for this matter, so I naturally have to do a good job. I absolutely won't be perfunctory or overlook it. Su Qingjun nodded and said, That's good. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something again. He hesitated for a moment, looked at Lu Chen and said, In addition, if you do this well for me, I will definitely reward you handsomely. Moreover, it will definitely be much better than the usual practice in Liuxiang Garden. In short, I will definitely not let you go back to where you were before. You can rest assured about this. A rare trace of embarrassment flashed across Lu Chen's face. He smiled bitterly and said, Then I thank you very much. Su Qingjun nodded to him, then turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But at this time Lu Chen suddenly called out to her saying, Shiji Su, I'm sure you know this eagle fruit's character. I'll take good care of it, and once it's ripe, I'll call you. But since I want to do this well, I still have to discuss it with you face to face. During this period of time you can't leave the cave at will. Su Qingjun nodded and said, Of course. I've left the mountain early recently to deal with some chores. For the next 20 days, I'll be staying in the cave residence to meditate. You can rest assured. Lu Chen grinned and said, Okay. Su Qingjun glanced at him, turned around with an indifferent expression, and walked towards the cave residence in the distance. And Lu Chen sat down again on the ridge of the field, looked at the spiritual field in front of him, and then looked at the blue sky above his head. Seeing the blue sky and white clouds, as clear as a wash, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He laughed softly and said, I've made a name for myself in farming. If there's day, there's night, and if there's light, there's darkness. When Lu Chen stood under the clear and bright sky, sighing with emotion on the fairyland-like flying goose platform, feeling that there were still some bright and beautiful things in life, in another place in the Kunlun Mountains, he, who was walking on the mountain road, felt a trace of coldness in his heart. He always felt that the place in front of him was a little dark. The Kunlun Mountains were very large, and most of the places were bright and spacious. Just like the famous sect, the Kunlun Party, it was full of righteousness and awe-inspiring momentum. But such a large cultivation sect, of course, it was impossible for everything to be as it seemed on the surface. At least in the eyes of He, the mountain he was heading to at the moment, the place hidden in the shadows behind the mountain peak, was dark and cold. Even though it was daytime and the sun was hanging high in the sky, the feeling it gave people still hadn't changed. The mountain was Nameless Mountain. For many years, it didn't have a name. It seemed that no one was willing to waste their brains to give this damn place a name. So after a long time, Nameless Mountain actually became the official name of this mountain. Nameless Mountain was a small mountain hidden in the Kunlun Mountains. It was surrounded by tall mountain ridges, so most of the light was blocked by the high mountains. This small mountain was dark, cold, lonely, and cold. It had never been liked by people. In the shadow of Nameless Mountain, in an even darker corner, there was a house that looked like an ancestral hall. Righteous Grave. He looked at the house that seemed very dark even in the daytime, and slowly read the words on the plaque hanging above the door. A grave was a grave, a place to take in the corpses of the dead. But in the Kunlun Mountains, not all the cultivators of the Kunlun Party would come here after they passed away. For cultivators with profound cultivation such as Jinjuan, Jinren, Jindan, and Foundation Establishment, the Kunlun Party would naturally have a beautiful cemetery to bury them. They would enjoy the incense offerings of the younger generation day and night. During festivals, it would be incomparably lively. It was like a completely different world from the Righteous Grave. This dark and cold place took in some lonely and wild ghosts. It took in some people who couldn't enter the bright cemetery of the majestic Kunlun. He Changsheng's corpse was placed here. Of course, it was reasonable to say that if they really wanted to investigate properly, this corpse should not have been moved. But even if the Kunlun Party's methods were powerful, They still couldn't keep a corpse in a place where people gathered for a long time. In addition, He Changxing had lived his entire life in obscurity and died without a sound. Of course, he couldn't enter the Kunlun cemetery, so he could only be placed here in the righteous grave. The gate of the righteous grave was painted black. In this dark shadow of the mountain, it seemed particularly thick and heavy, but it also gave off a somewhat gloomy feeling. He stood outside the gate and gently exhaled. This was also his first time here. Normally, almost no disciple of the Kunlun party would be willing to come here. He walked forward and knocked twice on the gate of the righteous grave. His low and deep voice spread out, but behind the gate was silence. There was no response. He furrowed his brows and used all his strength to knock a few more times. This time, the sound was even louder than before. However, in this silence, the sound that suddenly sounded was like an abrupt howl that made people's hearts tremble. After a moment, the sound of footsteps came from behind the gate. It slowly approached, and then opened the black gate. A thin and old face peeked out from the gap of the gate. For a moment he couldn't clearly see how old this man was. However, what gave him the deepest impression was the eyes of this old man who guarded the righteous grave. There was almost no light in those eyes. There was only numbness and dullness, as if he had reached the final juncture of his life, and was about to run out of oil. "What's the matter?" That pair of cold and numb eyes fell on He Yi's face. Perhaps it was the gloomy atmosphere and dark aura behind him that made He Yi subconsciously shiver. However, he was after all a cultivator with profound cultivation and outstanding talent. He quickly calmed down and then handed over a warrant from his bosom. "My name is He Yi. Under the orders of the sect leader, I am here to inspect He Changxing's corpse that was delivered here a few days ago." This corpse watcher did not reach out to receive it. He only glanced down and then looked at He Yi. After a moment of silence, he slowly pushed open the half door and said in a hoarse voice, "Come in." Seeing this corpse watcher move aside, he hesitated for a moment, and then stepped into the righteous grave. The moment he stepped over the threshold, he seemed to have a feeling that the sky had suddenly turned darker. Most of the houses in this righteous grave were painted black. A row of more than 10 coffins were placed side by side under one of the walls of this courtyard. On the other side, there were many rooms in front and behind. Some of the rooms looked pitch black while some of the rooms were lit up with specks of candlelight, emitting a faint light. As if he saw the doubt in He Yi's eyes, the corpse watcher slowly walked past him and said in a low voice, "Those with candlelight are those who have just died. The road to the netherworld is long and hard to walk in the dark. There must be some light to make it easier to walk." He Yi's expression changed slightly. He suddenly asked again, "What about those dark houses?" The corpse watcher turned his head somewhat woodenly and glanced at him. That pair of eyes seemed to have only a turbid haze and numbness. He said, "Those have been dead for a long time. Even their souls have gone far away." He stared at this corpse watcher, his pupils slightly contracted. Before today, he knew about this place called the Righteous Grave, but he had never been here before. Naturally, he would not know that this place was so gloomy and terrifying, and that there was such a ghastly corpse watcher. If he had not confirmed that he was indeed in the Kunlun Mountains, and this righteous grave was indeed the Kunlun party's territory, he would have even thought that this person before him was some kind of evil demon. He even felt that those vicious and evil evildoers from the evil sect that he had met before, in terms of gloomy aura, they were not even comparable to this corpse watcher before him. However, since the Kunlun party could allow this person to guard the righteous grave here, he should not really be some kind of demon. Perhaps this kind of place was really too rich in yin energy. After staying here for a long time, it would naturally become strange. Thinking of this, he felt some sympathy for this corpse watcher. However, he had always been a strong-willed person. After he nodded to the corpse watcher, he said, "Where is He Changxing's body placed?" The corpse watcher raised his hand and pointed to a certain place in the courtyard. He looked at his movement. Not only was it slow, it was also abnormally stiff. He did not know whether it was like a human or a ghost. He could not help but ask, "What happened to your hand?" The corpse watcher was silent for a moment and said, "It's fake." He was startled. He took a closer look and indeed found that although the corpse watcher's hand looked no different from a normal person's, it was actually carved from a wooden block. This made him a little embarrassed. He took a deep breath and bowed his head slightly. He said, "I'm sorry." The corpse watcher's expression changed a little. He seemed to be a little surprised. After he took another look at He, his stiff gaze seemed to have softened a little. Then his voice rang out again. He said, "In that room." He looked in the direction he was pointing. He saw a dark room at the end of the courtyard. There were a few flickering candlelight inside. He nodded and said, "Thank you for your guidance, sir." Having said that, he stepped towards that direction. However, he had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard the corpse watcher behind him say, "Hey, do you want to know how that person died?" He's body shook violently. He suddenly turned around. His eyes shone brightly. Chapter 146. Nameless Mountain's shadow was heavy, as if even the sun hated this place, and there was rarely any time for light to shine down. In this dark courtyard, amidst the eerie atmosphere, the corpse watcher's sudden words made He feel incredulous all of a sudden. "You know?" He stared at the withered, shriveled face and said in a low voice. The zombie widened his mouth and let out a chuckle that sounded like a chuckle. However, his face didn't seem to be smiling at all. Even when he chuckled, the muscles beside his mouth twitched a little, making him look extremely stiff. He even felt that a person who had just died would be more pleasing to the eye than this corpse watcher, because he looked more like a dead person than a dead person. The aura of death that was so thick that it could not be dispersed seemed to be emanating from his body at all times. After hearing He's question, the corpse watcher smiled strangely and said in a hoarse voice, "I have a condition." "What condition?" "I want to see someone. Find him for me." "Who is it?" "Dongfang Tao." "Dongfang Tao." He was stunned for a while before he suddenly reacted. "Oh, the one from Baichao Tang?" "That's right." He furrowed his brows and looked at the corpse watcher. "Why are you looking for him?" The corpse watcher was expressionless, looking like a lonely wild ghost standing in the dark courtyard. He said softly, "This has nothing to do with you." He was quiet for a moment, but then he shook his head and said, "I might not be able to do it. First, I'm not familiar with that master uncle Dongfang, and we haven't been friends in the past. Now, we might even become enemies. Secondly, according to what I know, he has been in closed-door training for a long time due to his severe injuries. Until now, there are no signs of him coming out. Even his favorite disciple could not formally acknowledge him as her master. So, I don't think I can do anything about it." The corpse turned around and said coldly, "Then forget it. I've said what I want to say. It's up to you whether you want to do it or not." He suddenly took a step forward. His eyes flashed as he said, "I have the sect leader's warrant in my hand. Is that not enough to make you speak the truth?" The corpse watcher did not turn around and said, "The warrant only allows you to enter this courtyard. If you want to suppress me, you're not qualified. Why don't you ask Reverend Idlemonth to come to me directly?" He was speechless. Of course, he could not really summon Reverend Idlemonth to this dark place. As the head of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idlemonth had many things to do every day. Moreover, this matter was handed to He by the old man. He did not want to be. He took a deep look at the corpse watcher and said, "Of course the sect master won't come here, but I promise you that sooner or later, I will help you call Martial Uncle Dongfang. But whether it will succeed or not, I cannot guarantee." The corpse watcher did not seem to be moved. He waved his hand and said coldly, "Before I see Dongfang Tao, I have nothing to say to you." After saying that, he walked away on his own. Soon, he walked to the other side of the courtyard. In the darkness, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. He took a deep breath. His expression changed several times. In the end, he decided to put this sudden interlude aside. He turned around and walked into the dark room with flickering candlelight. The eagle fruit tree liked light and moisture. It also liked to be nourished by abundant spiritual energy. It was a very delicate spiritual plant. It was not easy to raise. Because of its special properties, it was not easy to pick. It could be said to be a very troublesome plant. Luchin came to the Flying Goose Terrace. Basically, he lived and ate at the side of the spiritual field. He took care of the eagle fruit tree here. It could be considered as adding firewood to Su Qingjuan's exciting and dazzling cultivation career. Unfortunately, the eagle fruit tree likes sunlight. It never ripened at night. This allowed Luchin to at least sleep peacefully at night. Otherwise, not even a deity would be able to bear it if he could not rest all day long. On the first day he came here, Su Qingjun came to the side of the spiritual field to talk to him. Then she went back to her cave abode. He did not see her come out again that day. Luchin knew that Su Qingjun had a reputation for being obsessed with cultivation. Therefore, he was not surprised. He worked in the spiritual field until dusk. Then he finished his work for the day. When the sun was about to set, Luchin walked to the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace. He looked into the distance and saw a sea of clouds. The sun had mostly fallen below the horizon. The remaining light plated the clouds with a layer of golden color. It was like a brilliant golden ocean. It was extraordinarily beautiful. The mountain wind blew in his face, and his clothes fluttered. When he looked up at the sky from the cliff, he would feel a sense of relief. It was as if nothing in the world was important anymore. It was as if he was floating in the air. Perhaps this was the mentality of cultivation? Or perhaps it was precisely because of this that the ancient deities and virtuous deities of the past countless generations liked to stay in the heavenly abodes of the famous mountains and great rivers, watching the changes of the white clouds and the changing of the stars, and thus comprehending the real great Tao. Luchin looked at the blue sky in the distance and was lost in thought. The path he walked seemed to be different from everyone else in the world. Even if he saw the scenery of heaven and earth and the sea of clouds, he still could not understand the Tao that belonged to him, the path that belonged to him. The next morning, Luchin woke up early and went to the spiritual field to take a look. After one night, the 7 eagle fruit trees did not look any different from the day before. Some of the fruits hanging on the branches were still green, and did not show any signs of ripening. It should be a few more days. After Luchin looked at it, he had an idea in his heart. He took the wooden bucket to the spring in the mountains and fetched 2 large buckets of clear spring water. First he watered them, then he used his spiritual power to cultivate the trees. After this work, it was noon in the blink of an eye. He could finally take a breather. Luchin walked to the edge of the field and sat down. He glanced at the cave. This morning, Su Qingjun still did not come out of the cave. It seemed that this beautiful girl had made up her mind to stay in the cave and wait for Luchin to run over and call for her. Luchin smiled. He did not have any other grievances. After all, this was what they had agreed to do. He was sitting, calculating in his heart that at this moment in the Kunlun sect at the foot of the mountain, the news about He Changxing should have already spread. Most of the ordinary disciples might just be watching the fun, but if there was really a spy from the devil cult, it would be impossible for them to be indifferent to the reincarnation formation. Perhaps there would be some reaction? He squinted his eyes and thought quietly. Then he looked up at the sky and decided that tonight when it was quiet, maybe he should sneak down the mountain to take a look. Just as he was deep in thought, the quiet Fian platform suddenly heard a rush of footsteps from afar. Luchin was shocked. He turned his head and saw a man walking quickly up the mountain, heading straight for the door of the cave on the Fian platform. The spiritual field where Luchin was at was opened up at the side of the Fian platform. There were many ancient trees and rocks around it. Most of the area was hidden. In addition, the place was remote. If one did not look carefully, it would not be easy to notice this place. The man who came in a hurry obviously didn't notice that there was a spirit field 100 feet away from the cave residence. There was also a man standing there. Looking at his anxious expression, he ran to the gate and began to knock on the door. Bang 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 bang. The knocking sound was deep and clear, but it wasn't too loud. This was because the door of Su Qingjuan's residence was different from the houses at the foot of the mountain. It wasn't a wooden door, but a stone door that had been enchanted with a spell. A golden core cultivator, or rather a young genius that everyone looked up to, coupled with a wealthy family background, was just that different from the masses. Luchin touched his chest pocket. There was a yellow stone talisman there. Su Qingjun had given it to him when they met yesterday. Its function was very simple. He could use this stone talisman to easily contact Su Qingjun. In her words, the stone door was thick and heavy, but the cave inside was big and deep. If someone was really looking for it, it would not be easy to hear them just by knocking on the door. Seeing that the man used all his strength to knock on the stone door for a long time, but there seemed to be no response from inside the cave, Luchin suddenly became happy. He felt a strange sense of superiority that made him despise the man who was still foolishly knocking on the door. Although he knew that this feeling was very boring, he could not help but laugh. He did not have the idea of running over to help. On the contrary, he even took 2 steps back and sat down with his back against the trunk of an eagle fruit tree. He did not mind the dirt on the ground. After all, he had been rolling here for the whole morning. He watched from afar as the man became more and more distressed, and his smile became more and more joyful. Finally, the man who knocked on the door seemed to be unable to endure it any longer. He suddenly shouted, Sister Qingjun, are you inside? I am Su Biao. Luchin listened from afar. He pursed his lips and shook his head. Su Biao? This name is not good. Just call me Stupid Su. Su Biao waited outside for a long time, but the stone door still did not budge. Su Biao became even more anxious and paced around the cave entrance. It seemed that even his forehead was sweating. Suddenly, Su Biao seemed to have made up his mind. He knelt down in front of the cave entrance and kowtowed 3 times. Luchin, who was watching from afar, jumped in fright. He felt that things were getting more and more interesting. After a while, Su Biao pleaded loudly, Sister June, please come out and see me. This little brother really has an urgent matter. I beg you to save me. You want to save me? Luchin looked over with interest. He touched the yellow stone talisman in his bosom, but after a moment of silence, he let go. I want to see. When will she come out? Before he could finish the last word, he suddenly heard the door of the cave on the other side rumble. The stone door moved open, and Su Biao, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly looked up, his face full of surprise. In the distance, Luchin was also startled. He subconsciously said, he came out as soon as he heard help. It can't be such a coincidence, right? Chapter 147. The stone door opened, and a beautiful figure walked out from behind the thick shadow. It was Su Qingjun. She looked at Su Biao, who was kneeling outside the cave residence, and a look of surprise flashed across her face. Su Biao, what are you doing? Sister Qingjun, save me. Su Biao rushed forward and reached out to hug Su Qingjun's leg. Lu Chen's spirits rose as he watched from a distance. He thought to himself, is there something strange going on between these two? He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. Unexpectedly, Su Qingjun's figure flashed and avoided Su Biao's hug. At the same time, her expression darkened as she said, Sixth brother, what are you doing? Su Biao was startled and seemed to realize that he was a bit rash. He shook his head desperately and said, I was wrong. Sister June, don't be angry. I really have an urgent matter. Su Qingjun snorted and her expression softened. What's the matter? Say it. After a pause, she walked over and pulled him, saying, Stand up and talk. You're a man. Kneeling on the ground for no reason. What's the matter? Su Biao stood up. His face was full of urgency as he grabbed Su Qingjun's hand and said, Sister June, lend me 2,000 spiritual stones first. Su Qingjun's expression changed. So much? What do you want? Su Biao opened his mouth, but his expression suddenly became somewhat bashful. He couldn't explain the reason for a long time and only stammered, I need it urgently. Can you lend me the money first? Lu Chen was also interested in what he heard. He sat down on the ridge of the field and drank a spoonful of spring water from the bucket. This water was spring water from the mountains. It was sweet and delicious, making him feel like he was watching a show while drinking tea. At the same time, he said in a low voice, asking for 2,000 spiritual stones right off the bat. He really is from a grand family. So damn rich. On the other side, Su Qingjun asked for a long time, but Su Biao still refused to explain clearly. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She glared at him and said, If you have something to say, tell me clearly. Otherwise, why should I give you so much money? With a long face, Su Biao said, Elder Sister June, it's not like you don't know that our Su family has more than 100 disciples cultivating in the Kunlun party. However, more than half of our yearly offerings are given to you. If I don't ask for it from you, who else can I borrow it from? Su Qingjuan's complexion changed slightly, but she immediately sighed, looking a little apologetic. On the other hand, Lu Chen gasped from afar and said, My God, this isn't just an ordinary kind of favoritism. After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth and said, Sixth brother, you better tell me the whole story. If you really need my help, I will help you. Su Biao hesitated for a moment, then moved his head closer, and whispered a few words in front of Su Qingjun. This time Lu Chen didn't hear the important part clearly. He couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He scooped up a spoonful of water and drank it angrily. He thought to himself that it must be a shameful thing to be so careful in a place with no one around. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly saw Su Qingjun raise her willowy eyebrows. Her face revealed a hint of anger and she said angrily, What? You want to use this money to redeem that prostitute? Su Biao was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Just as he was about to beg, the two of them suddenly heard a violent coughing sound coming from a place about 100 feet away. Su Qingjun and Su Biao turned their heads at the same time. They saw Lu Chen holding his chest and coughing at the edge of the spiritual field that was mostly covered by ancient trees and rocks. It seemed that he had choked while drinking water, but it also seemed that he was struggling to not laugh out loud. His face was full of pain. Who is it? How dare you? Su Biao jumped 30 feet high, his face full of anger. He pointed at Lu Chen and shouted angrily, Where did this brat come from? How dare you hide on this flying goose platform? As he said this, his expression suddenly changed and he shouted, You bastard! Don't tell me you are so daring in your lust that you covet my sister June's beauty? Bah, watch me beat you to death today, then throw you down from this mountain. Lu Chen coughed and waved his hand. At the same time, he kept shaking his head. His expression looked a little strange. Su Biao was furious. Just as he was about to rush over and beat up this ignorant odd-job disciple, he was stopped by Su Qingjun from the side. She said, Enough! Su Biao stopped and turned around to look at her. He only heard Su Qingjun say coldly, He is an odd-job disciple from Baichaotang. He is here to help me. He will be staying on this mountain for a while. Su Biao was startled. His expression suddenly became a little awkward. When he looked at the spiritual field again, he found that Lu Chen had actually disappeared in just a short while. He must have felt a little awkward when he saw this scene. He didn't want to embarrass Su Qingjun, so he left first. Su Qingjun also looked at the spiritual field. Her clear eyes didn't show much strangeness, but she also let out a faint sigh of relief. Su Biao, on the other hand, saw that there was no one around, so he ran back to Su Qingjuan's side. He begged desperately in a low voice and bowed with his hands folded in front. In the end, he even looked like he was about to kneel down. This scared Su Qingjun so much that she pulled him back and scolded him harshly. However, Su Biao didn't care at all. He seemed to be very thick-skinned and kept pestering Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun scolded him and hit him. In the end, she seemed to be helpless. After being pestered by Su Biao for more than 2 hours, she finally waved her hand and stuffed something into his hand. Then Su Biao ran away happily. From the window of the thatched hut, Lu Chen watched Su Biao's figure disappear like a wisp of smoke. He lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling with both hands on the pillow. After a while, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. He seemed to have thought of something. He pondered silently and then sighed softly. Why are you sighing? Outside the thatched hut, Su Qingjuan's voice suddenly sounded. Lu Chen stood up and walked over to open the door. He saw her standing outside, a pair of bright eyes looking at Lu Chen. Lu Chen smiled and said, How did you eavesdrop? I didn't eavesdrop. Su Qingjun said, I just wanted to come over and ask you something. But after reaching the Jindan realm, my ears are too sensitive. I can hear your voice from outside the hut. Lu Chen looked at her and smiled bitterly. He nodded and said, All right. Su Qingjun looked at him and said, "You saw everything just now?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "I heard. Young Master Su didn't notice that I was here before, so I didn't restrain myself too much." Su Qingjun frowned with some annoyance and then said, "Can you not tell others? Otherwise, this matter will not be good for Six Brothers' reputation." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Of course, I will definitely not say half a word about this to others." "All right." Su Qingjun seemed to believe him and then turned to leave. But her body had only turned halfway when she suddenly stopped. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "You coughed just now. Were you laughing at him?" Lu Chen immediately shook his head and said, "No, I just choked on water." Su Qingjun stared at him. Lu Chen was speechless. He shrugged and said, "All right, I think it's a little funny. I didn't expect that a person like young Master Su of the Su family would actually like that kind of woman, and even want to die for her." Su Qingjun seemed to have the same feeling. She also shook her head slightly and sighed, saying, "You also feel that there is no true love to speak of for that kind of woman, right?" Lu Chen suddenly became silent, and didn't speak for a long time. Su Qingjun at first only sighed and didn't think too much about it. She planned to leave after saying that. Who knew that Lu Chen's reaction was a little strange? She couldn't help but look at him again and said, "What is it?" Lu Chen softly exhaled and said, "I think it's not completely like that." Su Qingjun raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "What do you mean?" "Prostitutes are also people. Naturally, they also have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Although I don't dare to be sure, but I think, maybe at some time, those women also have a little bit of sincerity towards someone." Su Qingjun looked deeply at him. A strange expression flashed across her face and said, "I didn't think that you would actually think of those women like that." "Those women?" Lu Chen smiled and stood there, looking straight at Su Qingjun's suddenly somewhat cold gaze, but he didn't retreat or shrink back. It seemed that Su Qingjun didn't want to talk about this matter with Lu Chen anymore. She turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But after a few steps, she suddenly heard Lu Chen say behind her, "No matter what you think, and you indeed have the qualifications to look down on those prostitutes, but I still want to say, although those women are lowly, they really are also people. There will also be times when they will have sincerity." Su Qingjun didn't turn around, so Lu Chen couldn't see her expression at the moment, and he also didn't know if she would be angry at these somewhat presumptuous words at this moment. After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth. Her voice was calm and didn't seem to have much fluctuation. She only asked lightly, "Then have you seen that kind of woman's sincerity?" "I have seen it," Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment, then said, "Very good." After that, she continued to walk forward. Lu Chen looked at her back, suddenly raised his voice, and said, "Also, although I believe that there will be sincerity in the prostitutes, that kind of thing is also very, very rare. Whether young Master Su has this kind of luck to meet such a woman with sincerity, I think it is very doubtful. And even if there is sincerity, whether or not it is in your brother, it is also difficult to say." Su Qingjun coldly snorted, finally stopped again, turned around and looked a little unhappy. She stared at Lu Chen and said, "After talking for so long, what exactly do you want to say?" Lu Chen said, "What I mean is, it is very rare to meet such a kind of sincerity. Why don't you go and get those 2,000 spiritual stones back?" Su Qingjun looked at him. After a moment, she lightly said, "I won't." Lu Chen said, "Why is that?" Su Qingjun said, "I want to eat the eagle fruit, so I can't go down the mountain." Lu Chen said, "Oh, that's true, but it's a bit of a pity." Su Qingjun said, "It's nothing, just a little bit of money. Just think of it as feeding the dogs." Lu Chen, that you're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.